Magic Kingdom at War, Volume 3, by Tao Wong. Narrated by Neil Hilligers. Chapter 1. That's the thing about inspirational speeches and sayings. They're inspiring, but at the end of the day, they are just words. And words without action are often meaningless. You can talk to a pair of sticks on the ground till your face was blue, but till you started rubbing them together, you weren't going to get a fire. And what Matt needed right now was a fire. Preferably one emanating from the barrel of a gun, a machine gun if he could help it. Unfortunately, all he really had was a half-working crossbow made of twisted rope and bent wood that could send a bolt of wood a dozen feet before falling to the ground. He could injure someone with it, but he might as well just grab a hunk of wood and throw it. It'd be not much weaker and a heck of a lot easier. Matt kind of figured that was pretty much the theme of his life in this new world after dying. Everything he could do might as well be done by someone or something else, easier and faster. He was superfluous in everything but his ability to actually make decisions. It was that thought that brought Matt to a complete stop, freezing in utter astonishment as his fingers were playing over the tactical map. Irvine, alchemist hero and one of Matt's two sapient companions, frowned deeply at his lord. Though he might have grown used to his lord's random antics, a factor of his upbringing in a soft world, the alchemist was still not entirely happy when he saw him freeze. A bony finger from the older man, still steady even if it was liver-spotted, came over and poked Matt in the side, causing the man to jump up in surprise. "What was that for?" "You froze. What is wrong?" Irvine said. "Another attack? Some other calamity that we have not planned for?" "No, nothing like that," Matt said. "I just realized I'm the worst thing in the world." "A man who expects others to read his mind?" "A middle manager." Matt paused, expecting a reaction, a chuckle, maybe even full laughter. He'd have settled for a groan. Instead, all he received was a blank look. "Middle manager? You know, the guys who take shit from the people above them and the complaints of the people below, who have no real power but still have to make decisions?" Matt paused, still getting a blank look, and sighed. Well, it was clear that whatever world Irvine had come from, his world had not reached the Industrial Revolution yet, or the wonderful world of international faceless corporations. Lucky bastard. "Whatever. Sorry, I was, Matt paused, looking back at the tactical map. What the hell had he been doing? "Planning how we could win against the army coming for us." "Right," Matt said brightly. Then he sighed. Right. They had an enemy army coming. If you could call 4 upgraded 𝗁𝒃 units and 2 heroes an army. At some point, if he survived, he'd probably laugh at the idea of such a small army, but right now, we got, what? 1 woodling unit in village number 1, 2 woodlings, and a firecracker flower here, and of course the stone keep. "Yes. That's not so bad, right?" Matt said, trying for cheerful. "We pull the woodling we have back, hope they hit the village and get slowed down, and if that's the case, we get the blacksmith upgrade that'll put us sort of in play. After all, they've only got, 4 days to get here?" "4 days if they do not stop, which would allow us time to get the blacksmith one way or the other. Not another unit, unfortunately." "Yeah, sucks that our guys all take 5, Matt exhaled, shaking his head. If they had a little more time, a little more warning, he could have spent his funds to get some new units. As it was, they would be a couple of days behind when the enemy arrived. "Doesn't mean we shouldn't consider getting more anyway." "Why?" Irvine asked, eyeing the man. "For when we survive, of course," Matt replied, cheerily. Irvine was giving him a look which Matt had to admit was more than fair. After all, the alchemist had found him curled up in a ball of despair a bare few days ago. He probably was wondering how he could be so calm, so collected, so perfectly fine. There was a simple answer to that, of course. He wasn't. Deep within, if you considered a fingernail's width deep, he was a gibbering ball of terror and despair. The two bleak emotions were waging a war within him, which was all that was needed to give him some kind of insane adrenaline dump, leaving him grinning a little too wide, making jokes, and mostly spinning around, trying to figure out what the hell he was doing. In truth, he had no idea. He couldn't build anything right now to make a difference. Still, buying a firecracker flower, just like this, was at least a nice little dopamine hit. There, Matt said, finishing up with clicking things through. I think, my lord, you might be best served to take a break, Irvine said slowly. Matt snorted. Sure. Though I wonder if we should pull our man back. Man, orc, Braskar. Matt waved upwards to where the orc and the remaining units of their makeshift army, a single woodling and firecracker flower unit each, rested, up north and east a little near the second village they had conquered. The village whose watchtower had given them the necessary information to tell them the enemy was coming. Should we build a watchtower here? Stop, Matt. It's fine, Matt said with a grin. There's no more gold anyway, but more information is better than none right now, and it's not as though I can do much with my gold. We're either going to win or not. And what about the future? Irvine said. That's why you're building that ranged unit now, isn't it? Not going to be one if we don't win, Matt chuckled, a little darkly. Irvine stepped closer again, leaning in to fix Matt right in the eyes. So close, Matt could see the little gray flecks that moved in the man's blue pupils. He could see the lines around the man's face, and he could definitely smell the pastrami the man just had for breakfast. Nose wrinkling, he began to lean backwards, only for Irvine to grab him and pull him forward so that their noses were touching. You are not touching anything else, my lord. You are going to go downstairs, have a good meal, maybe a stiff drink or 5, and then you are going to go to sleep. If you cannot sleep, my lord, you will drink till you can. Do we understand each other? I'm not sure you should be giving me orders here. Pretty sure that's not the way it works. Do we understand one another, my lord? Or should I be dosing you with one of my potions so that you won't be thinking of anything but my potion? A slight pause. Then Irvine grinned. It was not a nice grin. In fact, it was the kind of grin that reminded Matt of the sight of the alchemist dosing a bunch of raiders with one of his concoctions, making boils and red skins and other nastiness appear. So, do we have an understanding, my lord? I really don't like it when you use my title, Matt muttered, pulling at the arm. Thankfully for all the intimidation factor the alchemist had, he really was not that strong, and his grip was easily removed. Not that the other man was fighting him that much. I'll just take a break. Why don't I? Marvelous idea, my lord. Turning around, Matt moved to the exit, pausing at the doorway and the staircase leading downstairs to glance back at Irvine. The alchemist was just standing in the same spot, turned to face him, arms crossed, giving him a smile. Offering a weak one in return, Matt kept walking down. Damn alchemist was scary. Nearly made Walter White look downright friendly. Status report at the end of Chapter 1. Day 48. Gold 17.75 plus 22.25 gold per day. Units: 4 woodlings, 2 firecracker flowers. In production: blacksmith 1 of 4, firecracker flower 0 of 5. Structures completed: grove, road, stall 2, ranged copse, harbor, village number 2 watchtower. Structures available: grove 2, basic greenhouse, watchtower, tavern, marketplace, ranged copse 2, stone harbor, fishing dock, shipyard, trading outpost, temple, blacksmith upgrade. Cooldown: none. Chapter 2. Irvine watched the boy walk down the stairs, his eyes flat and humorless, until the majority of his footsteps had faded. Then the alchemist walked over to the doorway in the staircase, took a few steps down, and poked his head around. Content to see that Matt really had left, he nodded to himself in a self-satisfied manner, walked back to the tactical room, closed the door, and then ended up leaning against it on the other side. Overboiled potions and rotten ingredients. The older man found his knees shaking a little, and rather than fight it, he let himself sink to the ground. He exhaled roughly, eyes half closing. Manhandling the boy could have gone really badly, possibly could be a really bad thing in the future. Most men didn't take well to that. Took a good healthy ego to suffer a bruising like that and not scar, and when it did scar, it often came up at the most inconvenient times. Like in the middle of his second wedding ceremony, or whilst he was fucking his best friend's son's bride. Well, maybe that blow-up had other reasons. "𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 Irvine spoke up slowly. He needed to talk to someone, and since the options were himself, the orc, and Matt, it really was not much of a choice. "Irvine," 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 rumbled. "Trouble?" "Why's everyone saying that?" Irvine said. "I might just be calling to catch up." "Nothing immediate, then." Irvine sighed, rubbing his lined face. He was feeling every inch of his 83 years now. Not that this new body was 83, thank the gods for that. By that point in his life, he was having trouble going for longer than an hour before needing to take a piss, and that had made making potions a real pain. The kind of accidents that happened when you spilled the wrong thing down the loo did not bear thinking about. "No, nothing urgent," Irvine reluctantly agreed. "It's more, Matt. What is wrong with our Lord?" "He's cracking," Irvine said flatly. "I don't think he's doing well, with the strain of being, well, the Lord. In charge and in danger." 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 let out a long sigh. "I did worry that he seemed soft. I doubt he ever faced the blood trials." "I doubt most non-orcs have faced the blood trials," Irvine replied. He didn't even know what the blood trials were, but he could guess it involved a lot of pain and fear and blood. If 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄's orcs were anything like his own worlds, and they seemed, at least in the overall picture, to be similar, if a little more civilized, then that'd be true. "More the loss for them," 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 sighed. "I shall make sure to correct that mistake when I return." "Yeah," Irvine hesitated, then decided to leave that comment alone. First, they had to survive today. "Point being, he isn't analyzing the situation anymore. I think between the raiders and his inability to actually do anything beyond make decisions, he's not handling it well. He called himself, middle manager." "What is that?" "I do not know," Irvine said. "It did not sound good, and it certainly sounded like a powerless and thankless role." "What do you suggest, then? With a child who faced such fears, I would take them out to do battle in the wilds, face a direwolf alpha or other creature alone. When they had found their courage from defeating their opponent, then I would know they are ready." "That sounds like your blood trials." "Ha! If only those were so simple." Irvine shook his head, discarding his curiosity. "Well, you're not here. You must have dealt with your share of failing apprentices." Irvine grimaced. "I just threw them out of my tower. Well, except for my second son." "And what did you do with him?" "Let him bumble around long enough till he blew off half his fingers of one hand and then regrew them. Was a good lesson in being careless." "You are a horrible father and trainer." Irvine just shrugged. "Well, I don't hear a better suggestion coming from you." "I do not believe we have one. Support him as best you can, temper his rash impulses, but this is our Lord's blood trial to face, I fear. With our lives on the line, we have died before. It was not so bad," 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 said. "Except the dying part. That was horrible." "You can remember your death?" "Impalement. Hopefully our enemy is not as vicious as my previous ones." Then 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 fell silent, though somehow it felt like the silence was pointed. Irvine could not help but ask, "What?" "Just remembering those I left behind. I can only hope they survived after my defeat and capture." There was a slight tremble in the stoic orc's voice as he continued. I would not wish them to suffer like I did. Family? Yes. Silence, this time darker and more tempered, filled the room. In the end, Irvine shook his head, speaking softly. Well, at least the 𝗂𝒂𝒂 look like they're ready to just tear us to pieces, and I'll make sure to make a few death embrace potions, just in case. You do that, and you support our lord. He will need your advice and wisdom. Yeah. Irvine shook his head, looking one last time at the tactical map before walking towards the door. He stopped just before he exited, adding one last sentence. You best take care of yourself, orc. It'd be boring without you. Then, not bothering to wait for the orc to reply, Irvine made his way downstairs to make sure Matt actually was taking his advice and resting. If he wasn't settled, at least he had enough control to continue masking his emotions. Chapter 3. Matt woke with a pounding headache. Thankfully, Irvine had left behind one of his hangover potions when the old man had guided him back into bed after drinking him under the table. Memories of the night before were spotty, but he was sure he'd poured out his misgivings, his worries and fears and pain during the evening as the glasses of alcohol kept getting filled. Drinking down the hangover potion, marveling at the fact that it tasted like citrus and chocolate this time, he perked right up. The headache and overall body ache faded, as did the pain behind his eyes, though he still felt the need to freshen up further. Still, his mind was clearer. Some of the darkness that had threatened to pull him under released, not gone entirely, but enough for him to function at least. And really, that was all that he could ask for most days. After cleaning up, he pocketed the vial that the hangover cure had come from and started for the map room. The tactical map awaited, along with further thoughts about what he could do or should do. Halfway out of the door, his stomach rumbled loudly enough to remind him that he hadn't fed it, and Matt detoured long enough to pick up a meal. A bad idea, it turned out, since that was where Irvine found him. Returning to the control room? Irvine said, raising a single eyebrow even as he reached over and snatched the vial that was sticking out of Matt's pocket. Matt shifted a little to get away from the fast-moving, grabbing hand, though he was too late. After all, he was currently carrying a heavy plate laden with food and a mug, which reduced his ability to avoid the other. Yeah, good. I'll come with you. No, you won't. Irvine's eyes narrowed. Matt lifted his chin. Don't start. I'm fine, and you have something better to do with your time. I do? Finishing your potion recipe. Which one did you choose, anyway? Matt said. He couldn't even recall which one they'd discussed, if they'd ever discussed it. Defense, Irvine shrugged. Speed did not seem necessary, considering how fast our units move. Growth is a long-term advantage, but our units already heal quicker, unless it means experience growth, and we'd need units that last longer than a few fights. So, defense. Makes sense? Matt jerked his chin. So get to it. Also, if you get your next level, we might get something good. I doubt it. Me too, but anything is better than nothing, and that's all we got. Even so, I'm fine. Matt waved his hand. If I'm going to be the boss, I'm going to be the boss, and your marching orders are to get brewing. I got other ideas, including an ass-pull of one. You have the strangest sayings, Irvine said, but he did turn aside and head back to his rooms. I hope it is as good an idea as the ones you've had before. Oh, it's better, Matt called out after Irvine. After the other man had shut his door, Matt added, I hope. Climbing the stairs the rest of the way up the tower, Matt idly noted how much fitter he had gotten. Maybe his body had always been this fit. Nah, he remembered feeling a little out of breath the first time he came up here. Now, climbing the tower was easy. Not happy-making, but easy. Setting his meal aside, Matt looked at the map, doing the count again. The thought had arrived early this morning when he woke up between bouts of nightmares and pleasant dreams but he wanted to make sure his count was right before he made the call. Yup, 3. Of course, it'd take the other army only 2 days to turn around and chase them back. So this was the gamble. Wait another day, let the other army move away. Then they'd be too far away to protect their own fort. Negative, they'd be too far away, so they'd probably attack them anyway. Or send 𝗂𝒃𝒃 out now. Then it'd put the ball in his foe's court. They could turn around, hit 𝗂𝒃𝒃, weaken themselves, and let him build up further. Except, of course, he'd lose 𝗂𝒃𝒃, and certainly not win anything. If he waited, they'd have to face the oncoming army. There was no way the other army would turn back, rather banking on beating him first. Did it matter who beat who first if both of them lost their keeps on the same day? Were units left to roam and keep fighting, or would they disappear? He had no idea. Maybe they did stick around, and if that was the case, then he'd be facing an attack anyway when the army arrived. It would be ironic and show exactly how tilted this game was to their enemy if that happened, which probably meant they'd be forced into a battle whether he wanted it or not. Still, there was a small chance they could disappear if he hit the enemy's keep first. Assuming 𝗂𝒃𝒃 could win, they could end this part of the battle. The only real reason he was willing to risk that was the number of 𝗂𝒃𝒃 units being sent, too. 4. That was the kicker. Just one too many for there to be any left behind, or so he believed. He'd done the math. Kids, don't let them fool you. Math is important. If there was anything back there, it was minimal. A single unit at most. 𝗂𝒃𝒃, Matt said, choosing to speak to his warlord. He was the strategic genius, supposedly, or at least his war help. Might as well make use of him, even if he was beginning to wonder exactly how much of the lord part of the warlord title 𝗂𝒃𝒃 really held. My lord? Commanding, but questioning. Matt couldn't help but wonder what, if anything, Irvine had said to the other. Might just be worry about a fight he couldn't control. I've got an idea. Hear me out before you interrupt, will you? Matt said, then quickly laid out the plan to hit the enemy fortress while the other army was away. I know you don't have much in terms of units, but I figure they probably don't either. Why? 4 units? 2 heroes? I can't believe that we're that badly outnumbered. So they've got to have stripped their fortress. Got to, 𝗂𝒃𝒃 said, doubtfully. Well, I'm guessing, but I think it's a good guess. Matt forced himself to stay positive. He mostly believed he was right, but he had to admit that all this was educated guessing right now. Still, part of fighting on this level, Matt was realizing, was that it was as much a game of mind reading as it was controlling and understanding the logistics of the other party. 49 days. Figure production time required at least 4 days for a unit. That meant you could at most produce 12 units at intervals of 4 days. Considering he was running upgraded 𝗂𝒃𝒃 units, which, if they were like the woodlings, took an extra day, he should have even fewer than that. 9 units maximum of upgraded units, and considering they'd started moving a few days ago, that'd actually be 11 and 9. Now, taking into account inefficiencies in unit production and waiting for gold to come about, you'd have to say they ran on the lower end of that. He destroyed 2 units of 𝗂𝒃𝒃 in their initial meeting, another 2 in the most recent confrontation. That put them at 4 units destroyed and 4 units showing, so 8 units total, butting right up against the lower end of the calculation. That, of course, was assuming they'd started at the same time. He doubted that was true, or his opponent had started with stronger heroes and more gold to begin with, but everything he'd seen showed that they didn't have that much more of an advantage. The only question was, how much more? 5 days? 10? An extra 100 gold and 1 upgraded hero? He just did not know. But if it was too one-sided, they'd have steamrolled them already and this entire thing would have been over. So, an educated guess. More importantly, he had to think about what his opponent was thinking, or why he'd sent so many men so fast. The kind of individual who would pour all his resources into creating a ton of units, not bother with things like treasury buildings, and, most importantly, use the 𝗂𝒃𝒃, slavering nasty creatures that they were, as their people. Once he explained it all to 𝗂𝒂𝒂, Matt waited. He found himself holding his breath a little as he waited for the other man to make a pronouncement on his ideas, on his thinking. I cannot fault your logic, nor what you said about our enemy. You are still making assumptions, but good ones, but I believe them to be sound. I will ready the units and begin the assault immediately, 𝗂𝒂𝒂 said, sounding almost eager. Probably was. To Matt's surprise, having said it all, the man found himself resolved, a clear understanding having awoken in him. One that he was a little surprised to have come to, but it was resolute and bedrock firm. Not yet. You move tomorrow, Matt said. My lord. If you leave now, they'll cut you off, as I said. You have to wait until it makes no sense for them to try to hit you. Not without you beating them entirely first anyway, Matt said. That means waiting one more day. That would put them at your walls, my lord. I know, Matt breathed out, finding his heart beating a little wildly. Even so, he found himself speaking firmly. Even so. I do not like this, but if you are resolved, I am. We wait, let them get closer, and you hit them from behind. Matt hesitated, then added, I might not speak with you much over the next few days. Got to see what I can do to prepare here. But if I don't... Yes, my lord. Good luck. To you too, my lord. Matt smiled grimly, flicked his hand, and cut off the connection. Tension from speaking with the orc ran out of him, leaving him a little boneless. Finding a seat, he slumped into it for a few minutes, before he pushed himself upwards. Time to see how else he could tilt the field in their favor. Status report at the end of Chapter 3. Day 49. Gold 40, plus 22.25 gold per day. Units 4 woodlings, 2 firecracker flour. In production, blacksmith 2 of 4, firecracker flowers 1 of 5. Structures completed. Grove, road, stall 2, ranged copse, harbor, village 2, watchtower. Structures available. Grove 2, basic greenhouse, watchtower, tavern, marketplace, ranged copse 2, stone harbor, fishing dock, shipyard, trading outpost, temple, blacksmith, upgrade. Cooldown none. Chapter 4. First things first, gold. 40, not a lot, though he was now getting 22.25 a day. A little frustrating that things were beginning to come to a head just as his little gold engine was beginning to really get going. But that was life, wasn't it? It cut you off just as you were getting your feet under you. The only thing you could do was learn to roll with the falls, and maybe, if you anticipated it well enough, you'd do a drop-in roll and come right back up like a tumbler in an acrobatic performance. Not that he'd ever seen a proper 𝗁𝒃 one. Those were too expensive, but local troops were just as good and less expensive, made for fun dates too when you could get someone willing. He had a ranged fella coming along, which was good, but nowhere near complete in time. The blacksmith would be a bonus. It'd be here beforehand. No way to speed up production yet, though he'd bet there was an option later on. Seemed to be the way these things worked, hiding such options when he needed them most. So, assuming the fight was bad, what were his best uses of his gold? A flick use of his hen brought up all the options that he could buy. Structures available. Grove 2, basic greenhouse, watchtower, tavern, marketplace, ranged copse 2, stone harbor, fishing dock, shipyard, trading outpost, temple. No groves or ranged copses. Those were not useful in the current period. Stone harbor, fishing dock, marketplace, shipyard, or even the trading outpost were all non-pertinent to the fight. Same with the watchtower or basic greenhouse or the tavern. Tavern. A glimmer of hope at that idea. Maybe he could find a personal bodyguard or something in there. Then he shook his head. Even if he managed to get the gold for it, and quick calculation showed that he would have enough, barely, it would still need to be built. Damn building time requirements. Anyway, if he was saving money, maybe he should save money for that greenhouse. He was a little limited on his units, and if he was going to win the next fight, having the gold and options for another might just give him the advantage he'd need. I really don't think there's anything I can do in the short term, Matt muttered, going over the numbers again. It was the build time that was killing him here. Nothing he could build could save him, not in time at least. So, plan for the future. What would he need in the future? More money, always. The greenhouse for more options. The tavern because heroes seemed to be rather important. If he lost 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄, he'd need a warlord. Even if he didn't lose his orc, at some point he'd need to expand outwards, fight in the east, whatever the hell was that way, and explore north, and west, and south, right into the water. Yeah, maybe a naval hero was needed. Oh boy. He really needed to figure out what the heck was going to come from the water. Otherwise, he'd wake up one day and find the Vikings at his door, wanting to split his chest and give him the blood eagle. And he just was not into that as a fashion statement. Long term, he needed a lot. Right now, perhaps most importantly, whatever happened, units were going to die, which really meant he had about one option, all things considered. Still, he put a little mental pin in the idea of buying the tavern or greenhouse, one or the other, sooner rather than later. Even if nothing else, picking up something like the greenhouse and getting its long build time going before picking up a tavern or, hell, the fishing dock was not a bad idea. For now, woodling. Irvine made sure the boy was out of the tactical room, whittling away and muttering about maximal torsion and scrap metal in the room he'd taken over as his workshop, before he snuck up to talk to 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄. Not that he was defying orders, exactly. He had potions on the boil, so this conversation would have to be short anyway. But a man had to check. "What do you think?" Irvine said, not bothering with pleasantries the moment he got into the room. "He's on edge, but better. His ideas were sound, if a little desperate." "We're pretty desperate right now." "I did not say it was a bad thing," 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 said. "When blood is spilt, the ones who want to live the most are the ones who come back. The ones who seek death often find it." Very philosophical for a bloodthirsty barbarian. A successful, mostly barbarian. The rumor of berserkers and crazed fighters are only partly true. Those units we keep in reserve and utilize when we have to, but the majority of us know better than to throw ourselves onto the pikes of the humans. "Now we're letting an orc run the war," Irvine said with a huff. "But the plan is sound, just risky. I'd love to know what kind of heroes are coming." "Warlord and one other," 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 said immediately. "The other is my concern. If there was a mage or something else—" Irvine shook his head, though he knew the orc could not see him. "Did you have mages?" "Paltry creatures. They were mostly useless with their cantrips and tricks." "Same for the most part, except a few." Irvine licked his lips. Those were dangerous. There was one, the Blue Wizard they called him. He took down the walls of the hot gates, allowing the armies of criers to stream in and finish the Great War. Let us hope, then, that there are no mages of that caliber then. Your words, committed to the everlasting flame." 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 let out a little huff, but did not object to the heresy. The pair stood in silence for a time, one staring at the tactical map that laid out their fate in glowing hard light, and the other at the fading sunlight filtering through tree leaves, the smell of growing vegetation and fresh rain filling the air. "I should get back to my potions," Irvine said reluctantly. "If there's nothing else." "No." "Right. Goodbye, then." "Goodbye, alchemist." Turning around in his slippered feet, Irvine headed out the doorway, not looking back. There was no point. There was nothing back there to see. Status report at the end of Chapter 4. Day 49. Gold 20 plus 22.25 gold per day. Units 4 woodlings, 2 firecracker flour. In production, blacksmith 2 of 4, firecracker flour 1 of 5, woodling 0 of 4. Structures completed. Grove, Road, Stall 2, Ranged Copse, Harbor, Village number 2 Watchtower. Structures available: Grove 2, Basic Greenhouse, Watchtower, Tavern, Marketplace, Ranged Comps 2, Stone Harbor, Fishing Dock, Shipyard, Trading Outpost, Temple, Blacksmith Upgrade. Cooldown none. Chapter 5. Matt called an all-hands meeting 2 days later. One day before the army was supposed to arrive, a day after 𝗂𝒂𝒂 had started moving. A lot was riding on today. Everything from seeing if their opponent was going to call off the attack to chase down 𝗂𝒂𝒂, to whether they were going to hit the village at all and take away some of the gold they had. On top of that, the new blacksmith was finished, which meant he had more to review. Of course, calling the meeting in the morning when choices had yet to be made and played out meant that they were mostly just watching the tactical map, but it was why Matt had resolved to send Irvine away as soon as he could. "You got the potion recipe, you old coot?" 𝗂𝒂𝒂 rumbled. "Why did you not tell me?" "Potion recipe and level. And why would we?" Irvine sniffed. "I completed it last night, and it's not as though anything we do can help you." "I would still like to be informed." "Yeah, that's my fault," Matt said. "I figured you sleeping well for a night was better than us waking you." He hit a yawn of his own as he glared at the alchemist a little. It wasn't a very heated glare, what with the man's success, but it was still there. What Irvine didn't tell you was exactly how late he managed to get it, and how much of a commotion he made when he did. "So you are now level 2? "Yes." Matt leaned over and poked at the hero portraits by the side of the tactical map, calling up further information. It had been way too late in the day for him to even consider ascending the stairs, never mind how creepy wandering around in the flickering lamplight at night was in the Stone Keep. Also cold. No one ever talked about how balls freezing cold these castles were. Made sense, of course, when you thought about it. Stone conducted very well and dragged away heat. Anyone who ever sat against a concrete wall or floor knew that. Of course the building was cold. He just never thought about it, never had a reason to. Matt was not looking forward to winter. If he managed to make it, maybe he could skin a bear or something. In the meantime, he distracted himself from thoughts of freezing toes and other appendages by staring at Irvine's new character sheet. Irvine, level 2 alchemist, specialty, alchemy, skills, alchemical concoction 2, burst production, experience 2 of 200, attack 8, defense 9, power 15, knowledge 24. "You got an upgrade to a skill," Matt noted. "He did?" 𝗂𝒂𝒂𝒁 said, surprised. "Alchemical concoction 2, Matt said. "No idea what it does." "It's nothing major. Just a few more techniques that I can now use and a few more potion recipes I can research," Irvine said, trying for casual. He couldn't hide the small, self-satisfied smile that graced his lips, though. "Which ones?" Matt said. "Well, I finished a potion of defense, have an upgrade to that called Hardened Skin, and there's, of course, growth and speed still. But also there's an upgrade to the potion of strength. It's called Potion of Greater Strength," Irvine said. "Not very inventive naming sense, huh?" Matt said. "Is that all?" 𝗂𝒂𝒂𝒁 spoke at the same time, then realizing he had spoken over Matt, added, "My apologies, my lord." Irvine spoke up before Matt could tell the man it was no issue. "That's it? Better than nothing." "Any other changes? How you feel, think?" Matt asked curiously. He was still somewhat amused by the stats, but it was worth checking. "I feel mostly the same." Irvine tapped the top of his head. "I do have more recollection of the various potions I used to make, like memories returning. I found I have access to a few more ingredients and equipment below and can make some short-lived alchemical tools. Similar to my itching dust." "Short-lived?" "Yes. Can't hand them around because they'd break down too fast," Irvine said. "Damn." The older man shrugged. "My lord, should I continue my march?" 𝗂𝒂𝒂𝒁 spoke up. "We are packed and ready to travel." Matt hesitated before answering, leaning over to poke at the tactical map. He couldn't see details, unfortunately, about their enemy, even if they were literally next to his village, just an icon, sitting next to the settlement. He'd feel bad about leaving it entirely undefended, but since pillaging and sacking was not a thing, or if it was to non-sapient figures, his guilt was mostly mollified. Such a weird and bloodless war. Can't see any changes, so I say go for it. Very well, my lord. 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 hesitated. Is there anything else? Yeah, blacksmith. Any changes you see? Matt said. You're the one who knows the woodlings and firecracker flowers best. There was a long pause, a few grunts, then a solid thunk, followed by a growl of pain. The pair listening in the room tens of miles away looked at one another, confusion ringing their faces, but neither choosing to break the silence. After the cursing ended, 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 spoke up. They're still as tough as before, but I think the woodlings' arms have changed color a little. A darker wood, I think. The seeds around the flowers are all glinting a little in light, like there's metal in them. Oh, metal splinters, nice, Matt said. Not if they hit you, Irvine said, though he was grinning a little too. Is that all, my lord? 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 said. I would like to make sure we make it to the fort by tomorrow. Yeah, go ahead. Matt waved his hand imperiously, even if 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 couldn't see it. He was not sure there was much else he could do but wait up here, wait to figure out which way they were going. Even his own preparations were as complete as they were going to get. Fiddling further, especially doing something like digging rather obvious holes, would be of little use. He never realized how much work it was to dig a pit until you had to do it, especially when you considered exactly how much work a single man could do in a day. There was a reason they had work crews for all that. Even so, he'd spent some portion of the last few days trying his best to cover up his traps, or at least make them less obvious. Not that it helped. Camouflage was hard to do when you didn't really have much to work with. Some basic planking, some turf he'd cut out from around the other side of the hill to help cover the difference. It wasn't half bad, but unless the enemy intended to attack at night or were half blind, his efforts weren't going to do much. I'm going to go too, Dan, Irvine said, turning away. Just confirming, you're hitting burst production, right? Matt said, eyes narrowing. Yes, 3 defense potions done today. Irvine grimaced. I'll be wrung out after this, but it should be worth it. Good. Matt paused, then cocked his head to the side. What's the duration, anyway? Of the potions? Around an hour. Irvine waggled his hands side to side. In most humanoids. The elementals are not exactly the same. But I figure whatever is making this work will make it work for them too, Matt said, nodding. Good enough. Potions of strength and defense for most. He considered, then added, You should keep one of the potions of defense. The woodlings will get them both. The firecracker flowers should be on the wall and safe enough, at least for the initial charge. If we keep the woodlings just behind the doors when they break through, the flowers can fire down, cause even more trouble. Sound tactics. Then Irvine sighed. If we can make them understand it. Yeah, your word to HR. Again, Irvine gave Matt a look. He shrugged. Anyway, that's it. Get to it. Irvine snorted but hurried off, leaving Matt alone in the room again to stare at the tactical map, find out what their enemy was doing, and finish any planning he might have. Also known as waiting. Again. Status report at the end of Chapter 5. Day 51. Beginning of day. Gold 64.5, plus 22.25 gold per day. Units 4 woodlings, 2 firecracker flowers. In production, firecracker flower 3 of 5, woodling 2 of 4. Structures completed. Grove, Road, Stall 2, Ranged Copse, Harbor, Village Number 2 Watchtower, Blacksmith. Structures available. Grove 2, Basic Greenhouse, Watchtower, Tavern, Marketplace, Ranged Copse 2, Stone Harbor, Fishing Dock, Shipyard, Trading Outpost, Temple, Blacksmith Upgrade. Cooldown none. Chapter 6. It was nearly 4 hours later, when half the day had passed, that the damn unit icons moved. During that period, Matt had prodded at the information in the tactical map twice over, tried to see if there was anything he could do to speed up production, and then when that failed, finally went down, got himself a second breakfast, an early lunch, and his makeshift crossbow. That, amongst all the things, was his greatest pride and joy. He test-fired it just the day before, and it managed to send a crudely fletched bolt tipped with stolen metal through a chairback at a distance of 20 feet. Overall a success as far as Matt figured. He also had stored the 4 bolts he'd managed to make in the tactical room along with the spear and basic shield he'd used before. Matt rather expected he would have little chance to fire more than 1 bolt, especially considering he was hauling the bolt back by sheer force. 1 shot, and then, well, he'd get to try putting the pointy bit into the opponent. "𝗂𝒂𝒃 confirmed they aren't going after you," Matt said, recalling the fact that he should have mentioned this to the man. Then, willing the channel open to Irvine, he added, "They skipped the village. They're on the way to us." "Do you think that would have slowed them, fighting in it?" 𝗂𝒂𝒃 asked, curious. It was never an option for them, what with their ability to only move 1 hex at a time, so they had no way of knowing what the choices were for their opponent. Maybe, or they just don't want to risk losing even a single one of their units. The 𝗂𝒂𝒃 aren't the most disciplined, Matt replied. "If you two can stop bothering me, making potions isn't exactly easy, especially when you're multi-batching," Irvine groused. Then the alchemist forced to close the connection, leaving Matt feeling a little ashamed. "He's just stressed, my lord." Matt startled and glared at the unit icon, wondering if the orc could read his mind. Not that it was that complicated, but... "Aren't we all?" Matt said softly. "This isn't exactly the easiest thing in the world, waiting for someone to kill you, is it?" "You will not fall, my lord, and I will succeed, securing our first full victory over our opponent." "What if we don't?" "Then we die. But whilst it is prudent to plan for defeat, you cannot go into battle thinking of it. You must fight with all your heart, my lord. Claw for every second of breath, watch for every opportunity. It is those who do not give up who prevail," 𝗂𝒂𝒃 said. "So long as you keep your sense of caution, you will survive and win." Matt shut his eyes for a second, then opened them, letting out a long, thready breath. "Okay, yeah, you're right. I'm just not used to this kind of thing. The worst I ever had to worry about was a project deadline that my boss was definitely certain we couldn't meet but had to, otherwise we'd lose a $10 million client, and even then... Even then? Even then? I never cared. It was not my business, it was just a job. And while I did my job, I wasn't about to kill myself for them. Figuratively speaking. Matt laughed softly. Except it's not so figurative right now, is it? And it's not just me who's going to die if we fail." "Yes, my lord, but you forget one thing." "What's that?" Matt said curiously. "We are all dead men already. Dying's no stranger to us." At that reminder, Matt held up a hand to his head, remembering the agonizing pain, the headache, and his collapse as the brain aneurysm finished him off. The worst pain he'd ever felt in that life, bar none, which was fitting since it was the one that ended it. Yeah, don't remind me. It sucked. But then, it was over, and we began again, so perhaps that is what awaits us next. A never-ending game on repeat with stacked odds and no indoor plumbing? Matt shuddered. Yeah, okay, for hells, this isn't the worst that I could think of. At least they're not playing bagpipes. "You are a very strange man, my lord." "So I've been told." Matt traced his fingers over the table, watching the display ripple before he pushed the other thoughts aside. "Can you see them yet?" "I can, my lord. It's in the distance, but we can see them." "Let me know if you see any units, if there are any other problems." Matt exhaled sharply. "Hopefully. They can't have built up any either, so you should be clear." "So you've said." Doubt filled the orc's tone, but Matt chose to ignore it. He understood why he doubted Matt's estimations. But 𝗏𝒃𝒃 was right. You could choose to stew in your worries, or you could push ahead once the dice were thrown. I'll leave you to it then. I'm going to see if I can raid the larder for food for tomorrow, Matt said. Food and water. Maybe a bucket. Of course. Matt turned away, walking to the door only to be brought to a stop as 𝗏𝒃𝒃's voice cut in. My lord, tonight? Yes? Drink sparingly. Water the wine beforehand, and then put the wine aside. You will want your mind clear. Yeah, I get that, Matt chuckled. And I'm sure Irvine's got better things to do than offer me hangover potions. Yes, he does. Then a pause before 𝗏𝒃𝒃's voice, tinged with outrage, came shouting through. What kind of potions? Chapter 7. Did you have to tell him? Irvine said grumpily the next morning. In fact, the alchemist was overall just pissy, deep bags under his eyes, speaking of a very long night brewing the potions that they needed. Still, the man had scurried downstairs when he was done, handing them out to the various units and watching a single potion magically multiply such that each individual member of the Woodlings had a potion of their own, which they'd promptly then stored in their mouths, or what Matt figured was their mouth. How was I to know you hadn't told 𝗏𝒃𝒃 that you had a hangover potion? Matt said. Logic and understanding of human nature? Irvine said promptly. Why give up a chance for torturing a friend when you can? That's, well, I was going to say, not how friendship works, but I guess it does for some kinds of relationships, Matt said, recalling his own time in college. Sometimes he wondered exactly how healthy those relationships had been, what with the sheer volume of alcohol imbibed. Then again, whose fault was that? The people he hung out with, the overall atmosphere, or just teenage hormones? Are you daydreaming again? Irvine snapped. That kind of thing will get you killed in a lab, you know, or a fight. We're not in a lab or a fight. Furthest place we could be for a fight, Matt said, waving around the tactical room they'd met within. He'd not slept well, so he had added a last-minute twist to his usual pit trap plans, brushing them down a little and then adding the simple roadblock of a bunch of the training pals and an overturned wagon on the main road up. Thankfully, the Woodlings were more than happy to help him with such simple manual labor. At yours and 𝗏𝒃𝒃's insistence, I might point out, I am fine with the idea of joining the battle for a bit of time, at least until I fired off most of my bolts. And risk having you fried by a magic user? Irvine shook his head. Not a good idea. We don't know they have one. We don't know they don't. Are you always this cautious? Matt grumped. Yes. That's why I have all my fingers and other more careless and less paranoid alchemists don't. Didn't you get a new body? Not the point. I still had all my fingers in my old body, Irvine sniffed, though he was careful not to mention the scars along one thigh and the missing little toes of his left foot. That hadn't been his fault. Mostly. How was he supposed to know that the 𝗏𝒃𝒃 grains had grown a mold in their month since their collection? It had never happened before, and no one had ever mentioned that possibility. Well, look at old 10 Fingers Irvine here, proudly waving all his digits in my face, Matt said with a little smirk. I still think you're worried about nothing. We haven't even seen an option for mages, and if temples are required to get clerics or acolytes or whatever else you call them, then it's pretty clear that you need a mage tower to get a mage. Or so you believe. That's how these games work, Matt said. Yet, we're not in a game, and you've said it before, this is not exactly the same, no? Matt had to shrug, not wanting to admit defeat directly, even if the man was right. Anyway, why aren't you catching a nap? He waved down to the screen and then the window. I can always wake you later. I'm pretty sure falling asleep on your feet is just as likely to get one killed. Irvine smirked, reaching into his robes and pulling out a purple potion with sparkling yellow lights drifting through it. I have a solution for that. And what is it? A solution. He waited, then let out a long sigh, obviously annoyed at Matt missing, or in his case ignoring, the obvious pun. You've spoken of this coffee you miss. That gives you energy? Matt nodded, looking very interested in the potion now. This is similar, if a little more powerful. Something in the way the alchemist said that had Matt asking, exactly how little? Guaranteed to put even the mortally wounded on their feet and ready to fight for the next 4 hours. After that, they'll probably fall over dead, but it'll get them on their feet for sure, Irvine said. Yeah, just a little more powerful than coffee, Matt said. Still sounds like the kind of potion would be good for someone like 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 to have. Can't, Irvine said. It needs to be brewed on today, and will only hold efficacy for another 8 hours. After that, it goes from a stimulant to a poison. Well, that could be useful too. Not if the poison itself breaks down within the next 7 days at unknown rates depending on the environmental conditions, and there's no easy method of delivery, Irvine said. Unless you expect our enemies to hold still while we pour the poison down their throat. Unlikely, Matt said, looking around the table, then grinned. I could invite them in for a meal. You're not serious, correct? I really am not. My lord, we're closing in on the keep. I unfortunately have to report that your estimation of a complete lack of resistance is wrong. 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄's voice cut in, interrupting the conversation. Matt whipped around, his back straightening, and the light joviality he had been wielding to keep himself from panicking about the upcoming battle disappearing. His heart had sped up, and for a second his throat closed off as he tried to speak. He forced himself to breathe, clenching and unclenching his fist even as he felt a sweaty dampness form. How many? What kind? Irvine spoke before Matt managed to regain control. Too many? 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 paused. Of us to be stopped. You overboiled orc, Irvine snapped, staring at the pale-looking Matt who had swayed a little at the orc's initial words. He put a hand to his own chest, his earlier fatigue wiped away as well by a shot of adrenaline of his own. This is not the time for fun and games. But you were allowed to joke, 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 said. Unfair. Laughs unfair. Enough, Matt growled. What kind of opposition are we talking about? Seriously. 1 unit of 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄. They're standing on the walls, running back and forth and howling. 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 laughed darkly. I do not think they have any ability to strike at us. Stones and boiling oil, Matt said, glancing outside of the window where the woodling stood along with the firecracker flowers. The boiling oil was a new addition, added right above the gates. I'm not sure how they will yield it, but the keep's defenses might be the biggest concern. We shall keep it in mind. 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 hesitated. If we bring the firecracker flowers within range, we could pelt them initially for a while, but... But what? Matt asked. I fear your opponents will be at the gates before us, 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 replied. We still have a distance to march. And if you hold back too long, you think we'll lose, but if you rush it, you think you might be able to save us before they break through, Matt said, clarifying what he assumed the man was talking about. He wasn't necessarily wrong, though. Not much faith in our defenses here, do you? My apologies, my lord, but he's teasing you, you fool of an orc, Irvine said. And you should know better anyway. Better? Matt cocked his head to the side, confused as well by the alchemist. What are you talking about? That army that's coming? The one just outside the window? Matt jerked, hurrying over to peer out the windows. Eyes narrowed as he realized that, yup, there really were figures moving closer. At a good damn pace, too, which was why he hadn't really noticed them before when he glanced out. Meanwhile, Irvine kept talking. That one's gonna tear through us long before you're ready to fight your battle. Or we'll beat them. Either way, you're superfluous if we die. If you lose, I shall avenge you, 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 rumbled, sounding a little angry at Irvine's callous words. That's nice. That and a leaving of bread will get me across the river of death, Irvine said. Stop poking at the orc, Matt said. You should get going down. Even if you can't control them well, it's better than nothing. Which is what our enemies have, 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 said. Over here, that is. Yeah, I'm going. Irvine paused, took back out the potion, drank it down, and let out a long burp. Almost immediately, his face grew red, his pupils started dilating, and a wide grin appeared on the alchemist's face. He pocketed the vial, then bounced down the stairs, moving like a man half his age. Man, Irvine really does hide the good stuff. I really want to try that, Matt complained, watching the older man disappear before turning back to the tactical map. He drew another breath, noted his heart was still beating like a drum, then spoke simply. Do what you think best, 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄. I trust you. And if I think we're going to lose, I'll let you know. Strength and blood, my lord. Matt nodded absently at the words, waving his hand sideways and cutting off the connection before sagging a little. Well, the ball was rolling at last. Status report at the end of Chapter 7. Day 52, beginning of day. Gold 86.75 plus 22.25 gold per day. Units 4 woodlings, 2 firecracker flowers. In production, firecracker flowers 4 of 5, woodling 3 of 5. Structures completed. Grove, Road, Stall 2, Ranged Copse, Harbor, Village Number 2 Watchtower, Blacksmith. Structures available. Grove 2, Basic Greenhouse, Watchtower, Tavern, Marketplace, Ranged Copse 2, Stone Harbor, Fishing Dock, Shipyard, Trading Outpost, Temple, Blacksmith, Upgrade. Cooldown, Burst Production, 10 days. Chapter 8. Irvine stood before the walls, the firecracker flowers beside him. The majority were arrayed in front of the gate and a few along the remainder of the wall. The woodlings were all across the front wall and the other walls, spread out to cover any gaps. Not that Irvine thought there were going to be any multi-wall sieges. Even if they had a warlord, their enemies were still missing one important aspect of launching a siege: siege equipment. Also, hands. Those paw hands that the 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 had were nasty, but even a glimpse of them and the way they ran across the ground told Irvine enough to know that there were not going to be any exceptional alchemists coming from that group. Thumbs, nice, long, and flexible ones, were kind of important in that regard. Watching the 4 units of 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄, all of them but 1 upgraded units with the darker fur and larger bodies, Irvine could not help but pull their information to him. Enemy unit, 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 2, tap, creature, number 10, melee attack, medium plus, melee defense, low, ranged attack, none, ranged defense, low, hit points, medium, speed, medium plus, special abilities, charge, vulnerabilities, unknown. 40 total units that they had to kill. Stacked against that, they had 24 of their own. Not exactly double, at most 1.5 times in number, which wasn't great at all. On the other hand, they had the walls and the ability to fire down on the enemy, so that was an advantage. Of course, the big question marks were the enemy heroes. Those were whom Irvine was curious about right now, his gaze locked on the 2 figures on horses. His lips pursed, considering. How did they get the horses? There was no option here, and 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 certainly had no mare of his own. Was that a factor of their units? Did the horses just appear for their opponent? Was there lack because their units were too slow otherwise? More puzzles. He was beginning to think like his lord in a way, questioning everything. Then again, a good alchemist always questioned things. That's how you made better potions. He pushed it aside for now. Instead, his gaze locked on the pair of heroes as he drank in their details. The first, riding a little ahead, was clad in metal armor. Light, just enough to cover the basics of the shoulders, legs, and body. There was a term for it, but Irvine had never bothered to remember those things. The warlord, he assumed the only hero in armor was the warlord, was carrying a long spear in one hand and had a mace stuck on the side of their steed. The face was impossible to pick out, what with it being covered by a close-faced visored helmet. So, warlord, or perhaps warrior. 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 had mentioned that, the difference perhaps being in how well they ran their units. If this was a warrior, that might work better for them, especially if they managed to catch the warrior by surprise. They were still a little far, but squinting he managed to pull up the information. Nia Ray, level 1 warlord. specialty, tactical maneuvering. Skills, redeploy, rally. Experience, 3 of 100. Attack 11, defense 14, power 6, knowledge 12. Nope, Warlord. Those skills. Matt, word of caution. The Warlord has the skills of redeploy and rally. Irvine frowned. I don't know what that means. Rally is probably to make units hold and not run, Matt said, then doubt filled his voice. Though I've never seen a unit break, 𝗂𝒂𝒂's never mentioned it. Maybe not something that elementals have to worry about, Irvine offered. Makes sense. And the 𝗂𝒂𝒃 don't look particularly smart, so not running makes sense, Matt added. What about the other hero? Irvine had shifted his attention in the meantime, eyeing the other figure. This one was more interesting. They were wearing a simple cloth getup that was wound around their torso, though they wore a pair of pants. Made sense considering they had to ride the horse, though it showed quite the amount of mud-splattered leg, meaty leg too, since even without armor, this figure was larger than the Warlord. A weird dressing mage? Or something else? Rather than guess, Irvine just pulled up their info. 𝗁𝒂𝒂𝒃, level 1 acolyte, specialty, theology, skills, minor blessing, minor healing, experience, 3 of 100, attack 7, defense 8, power 11, knowledge 17. Good news, it's not a mage, Irvine said. Bad news, it's a priest. Skills? Matt asked, voice filled with tension. Minor blessing and healing. Is that healing or minor healing? Matt asked tersely. Minor healing. Oh, good, Matt exhaled. Also, fudged signatures. This is going to be a pain. There was a long pause, while Irvine waited for the man to explain himself. They had time for a bit, while the boy rallied his thoughts. As much as it chaffed Irvine to rely on someone so young and inexperienced, he had to admit, the boy had taken to the idea of this game better than he would have if he was left in charge. If nothing else, some of his assumptions about the game had panned out better than Irvine's own stumbling. Right. Here's the PowerPoint slide answer to everything. Redeploy is probably the Warlord's way of moving troops around. Probably shifts his units, potentially a minor teleport. Might be a problem, especially if he starts splitting his troops. In fact, I'd bet on that, if they had a way to get up the walls. As it stands, they might still try to trick us to redeploying our own units. We don't have that control, Irvine said. They don't know that. They might even be thinking 𝗂𝒂𝒂𝒂's here, giving us that ability. Or we're thinking it. Matt shook his head, realizing the error. Maybe not. But either way, if they split up, won't matter for us. It's more if they use it to hit a weakness in our defenses. The gates. Yeah, the gates, Matt said. Rally, we talked about, but it might also be a targeting command. Be careful about the 𝗂𝒂𝒃 swarming you, Irvine. Don't put yourself in a position where that might happen. I'll mind the potions. Minor blessing is just a bluff, so that's a non-issue. Makes them something stronger, faster, tougher, maybe all three, but low grade. Not much we can do about it. I'd keep an eye on her casting her spell, but otherwise, it won't matter, Matt said. The minor healing is the problem. Depending on how often she can use that, it could really change the fight. I can see that, Irvine said, recalling how their own spells had done the same in other battles. So here's what you're going to do. Matt hesitated, then added. Kill her first. What? Kill the healer. Basic RPG tactics. You never let them live, Matt said firmly. Always take them out, otherwise they can just keep the DPS up running. I have no idea what you're saying. It's fine. Just kill the healer. Matt frowned, considering. In fact, if you can, ignore the tank. What tank? I see no tank. Irvine peered closer. Are they bringing a storage vessel of oil to burn the doors down? I do not see that. No, the Warlord. Leave them alone. You probably won't be able to take them down with their armor, and you're better off finishing off the other units. You do recall, I only have minimal control over the units, Irvine said. Yeah, I got you. But we do our best to follow the strategy. As you say, My lord, I really don't like how you say those words. Irvine could only smile while he focused his gaze on the upcoming pair. There really was not much more to say, even as the 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 loped closer and the heroes cantered after them. Their enemies certainly were not taking their time in arriving. Chapter 9. Matt stared at the map, then flicked his hand sideways, calling up the tactical information. He watched it birth, eyes narrowed. He blinked, seeing something new. Units engaged, 2 woodlings, 1 firecracker flower, 1 hero versed 4 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄, 2 enemy heroes. Spells available, regeneration, lightning bolt. Oh, shit. 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄? Words spoken into the air, reply coming soon after. My lord? New information, Matt said softly. Tactical map just called up new details. A new spell. It's got a very short range, 2 hexes only. That is very short. A slight pause, and then 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 sighed. But long enough for me. What is the spell? Lightning bolt. Any details? Not a lot. But here's what I have, Matt said, reading it out. Spell, lightning bolt, casting time, instantaneous, range, 2 hexes, duration, instantaneous, effect. Deals 12 points of damage to 1 unit. Cooldown 5 days. There was a grunt from 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 when he heard that before the orc fell silent. A moment later he spoke again, his voice filled with fierce determination. I will endeavor not to die. I think if I had not my level... You might? Matt made a face. Let's hope it's not a one-shot, but there's no indication of how much life you actually have. No, there isn't. Matt looked away back out the window. The army had closed in further, riding past the now quiet village and the simple walls thrown around it, ignoring the harbor, the way in, and the lack of units guarding the village, but going straight for them. The enemy had the 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 ranging outwards, just the lower-level, unupgraded members. Nothing too surprising in that, but what was interesting was when the pair of units roving ahead actually fell into his pit traps. Jaw-dropping, Matt rushed to the window, only to see one of the 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 that fell climb out. Long whining noises reached him, even as the enemy warlord started waving his hands around, drawing the scouts back. Obviously agitated, they slowed a little as they approached the first of his half-dozen holes in the ground. I can't believe they fell for that, Matt said. Not when the enemy warlord was actually there. Neither can I, Irvine muttered. Matt jumped a little, before he realized he'd opened the channel, when he was speaking with 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 about the lightning bolt's abilities, to the alchemist, figuring the other hero should know too. What happened, my lord? 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 asked. Pit trap. Matt shook his head. Concentrate on your fight. We're doing well. He laughed a little, seeing how the pair of heroes were now arguing, with the warlord having gotten off their horse. They were waving their hand at the other, gesticulating quite aggressively. Who knows? If they keep going this slow when you hurry, you might get done before them. Silence, and Matt cocked his head to the side, trying to check the connection. Satisfied that it was closed, he returned to watching the enemy heroes as the warlord began the process of chivvying the group through the randomly scattered pit traps. Really, it shouldn't have been hard. If not for the fact that they had to move away from the main blocked road, none of his pit traps would have mattered. Now they had to decide if they were going to move things out of the way or just continue clambering up the hill. And one thing Matt had realized, the 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄, for all their speed, just did not have his woodling's sheer strength. The barriers that had taken the woodlings less than an hour to put out would take a lot longer for the others to shift. Easier, much easier to move around, if more dangerous. Now they wove upwards, going around and prodding at the occasional clump of extra dirt and collected greenery. Matt watched and cursed himself, making note that he really should look at creating mini decoy areas, rather than trusting into the irregular shape of the moth to throw them off. What's the range on the firecracker flowers anyway? Matt asked, curious. He had never tested the range units on the walls, but even office worker that he was, he knew that the angle and greater height would add to the distance they could reach. Soon, Irvine replied. Should we wait till they're closer? accuracy at those ranges. Matt hesitated, thinking. He knew that volley fire was a thing meant to catch the enemy by surprise at the start, meant to extract the greatest toll upon firing. Something about breaking morale, too, he assumed. He knew then that he should probably wait a little. Not fire at the maximum distance, especially since the enemy were taking no effort to cover themselves. Let's wait a little. Get them, say, 3/4 of the way in. We want to hit them hard when they're still clustered like this, Matt said. We've got a few more traps, no? You should know. Matt grinned, a little proud. He hadn't thought of that the simple act of the pits being there when the ranged attackers opened fire would cause mayhem, force them to keep close and bunched up, even when they might want to split apart. Then let's wait. Matt held his breath, waiting as the firecracker flowers stood on the walls awaiting a command. Thankfully, they had that much control over the units at least. He watched as the enemies progressed, slowly edging upwards, testing the ground and moving around suspected traps. In particular, the warlord kept looking up, frowning as they stared at the firecracker flowers, uncertain about their presence. He chivied the group, trying to make them move faster while still being safe, an oxymoron that was obviously making the 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄, never the most disciplined units, upset. Nearly there. In 5, 4. Matt listened to the countdown, till the 1 was almost whispered, before the sudden roar of "Loose!" rang out. The firecracker flowers raised their hands, even as the warlord's head snapped up, shouting a warning. Not that it mattered. The 𝗂𝒂𝒊 wore no armor, held no protection to stop the explosive projectiles coming at them. The repeated crack of firecrackers going off as water, pumped through ivy vines along the back, struck the seeds and expelled the plant projectiles, the explosive splotch, echoing through the keep. Matt watched the glint of light the seedlings carried, the metal tips making it look like a hail of needles flying through the air. 𝗂𝒂𝒊, far below and grouped together, had started running, dispersing at the warlord's command. They could not, however, keep up with the speed of the flung needles. Blood flew through the air, misting the surroundings as they struck hardened fur. Matt could barely see the damage, though he could spot the creatures dancing to the side, some falling to the ground as they took the full brunt of a blast or two. Others, most of them, twisted and shrunk away, but kept coming, injured in varying degrees, but still functional. That was the danger, the problem of the firecracker flowers and their seedlings. Not enough punching power dispersed attacks at a distance. It was a problem that would rectify itself as the enemy closed, but for now, the flowers switched arms, even as new buds and seed pods grew on the expended arms at speed. More yelps, more chaos. Matt watched as some of the 𝗂𝒂𝒊, in their haste to run from the ranged attacks, found themselves crashing into the pits. They tumbled within, clawed their way out, some dragging broken arms or legs. Most came out, injured or not, though. Matt could swear he saw one with a stripe of white fur along its eyes never emerge. Fire at the hero! The hero! Irvine's voice, barking orders. Explosions once more, just as loud as before. Matt winced, hoping that Irvine had some good ear protection. Even as far away as he was, the continuing explosions still hurt his ears. He could only imagine what it was like nearby. More fire raking the 𝗂𝒂𝒊 who were nearest. Matt sighed, not needing Irvine to report their failure at attempting to control their ranged units. They were firing, but they were certainly not aiming at the heroes. Instead, they targeted the 𝗂𝒂𝒊 closest to the walls, multiple attacks at times burrowing into individual 𝗂𝒂𝒊 to drop them permanently. In fact, as their enemy climbed, Matt could see more corpses left behind. 4 𝗂𝒂𝒊 dead. Unmoving bodies, even as the entire group clawed their way up. Not a complete victory, not yet, but a good start. That was when the healer raised her hands. Chapter 10. Matt snarled, darting back to the tactical table. His mind resolved itself, even as his fingers played across the map. He had hoped to contain his spell usage, not knowing if he could use 1 or 2, if both spells could be triggered, or was he limited. Damn game and its lack of an instruction manual. He barely even paid attention to the new information that came up, his fingers darting to the lightning bolt icon. He triggered it, pointing at the hero icon for the healer. Too late, though, as he watched numbers flicker and change on the map. No need to know what had happened. She must have cast her healing spell. All their efforts gone. He didn't have time to look at the dead. Matt's finger moved to hit the icon to push the lightning bolt hovering on his finger towards her. Then he froze. He blinked, stared at his hand. Pushed, or tried to, but it rejected his commands, a portion of him unwilling to commit. "What the hell?" "My lord?" 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 asked. "What, boy?" Irvine said. How could he explain his failure? Explain why he stopped from launching the lightning bolt? How could he explain the sudden surge of wrongness that stopped his movements, that refused to let him commit to the action? This... For the first time, Matt realized he was going to kill someone. Really kill someone. Or at least harm them. And for all his life, he had never even punched another person. Why should he? He was taught not to. That's what civilized people did, what good people did. He didn't consider himself a saint, but he was a good person. And now... Lightning bolt. Healer. I need it. I should use it. He trailed off. "This isn't the time, boy. Make a choice, live or die," Irvine snarled. "But she just healed most of the damage done to one of their units. She's raising her hand again." "This is your blood trial, my lord. Kill or be killed, and in so choosing, doom us or yourself." "Myself." "The boy who faces the trial never lives. Either he dies or a true orc emerges." "A true orc, eh?" Matt said. He shut his eyes, reaching within. He had died once. He did not want to die again. He had lived a life of mediocrity, wanting something, anything more than work to happen. He had burnt out, grown so depressed he never cared, till he had been given a choice. And he'd made it. Got himself killed, but he had thrown himself wholesale into it, without thought, without care. This was a new world, a new existence. Was he going to half-ass the job again, or commit? Perhaps. Committing to this world wasn't just about taking half-hearted attempts at optimizing the builds or trying to build cheats through the system. It meant accepting all of it. The savagery, the wrongness, the need to make decisions. And be bad. Be a true orc, if you would. Eyes still closed. He stabbed the floating icon. There was only the barest tactile sensation. Even then, the world shook. Matt opened his eyes reflexively, catching himself on the table as the roar of thunder continued to echo. So long, so close. His ears hurt as he stumbled over to the window, ignoring the flashing tactical map. This was something he had to see with his own eyes, rather than trusting in the magical nature of the table. Outside, smoke rose in the distance. He traced the smoke downwards, the aftermath of the lightning bolt and the loud rumble of thunder that had followed the attack fading. 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 had cried and bolted, moving aside, and some even going so far as to flee the lightning strike and running into the pits once again. The warlord, the closest to the attack, had been tossed aside and was standing up, shaking their helmeted head as though to clear their head. Matt's own units were doing better. They barely looked shaken, though Irvine was picking himself off the floor of the wall. The ranged units were reloading their arms and had begun to shower the disrupted attackers. If there was one thing you had to give the elementals, they were hard to scare. Finally, Matt turned to regard the cause of the rising smoke, the strike point of the lightning bolt. He was grateful he had not been looking in that direction, for the sheer volume of thunder spoke of a lightning bolt rather more powerful than he had expected, or perhaps it was just the proximity of the strike that had made it seem so much louder. In either case, the healer who had been so vital, so alive, was lying on the ground. From this distance, other than some minor smoke coming from her, Matt thought she might even have been sleeping. Certainly not a shriveled or blackened corpse like the movies had made him come to expect, just a still figure. Unconscious even, perhaps. if not for the way the warlord had rushed over, shaken the body, and then looked upwards to his tower. He could not see their eyes, yet he found himself unconsciously moving backwards, shivering at the glare that was shot towards him. "Raskar," Matt said as he backed away from the window. No more reason to look out, not right this moment, and he didn't want to think about the death he had caused, could not afford to break down or deal with the revulsion that was twisting his stomach. "My lord, try not to get hit by that lightning bolt. I just used it and, well, she's down." "She?" "Enemy hero healer," Matt clarified. Successful, it seemed, at least in taking care of the healer. Now the question was, what was their enemy going to do next? Chapter 11. The answer was that their opponents kept charging, which was kind of good, for Matt and his people at least. Even as Matt watched, the hero glowed and slammed a hand forwards, a luminescent little flag appearing a couple of dozen feet ahead of them. All the 𝗂𝒂𝒄 attention was drawn to it, their jaws dropping low. Even those in the midst of running away slowed and stopped and then began to move toward the glowing flag. "And that's the rally ability in play," Matt said, nodding to himself. That was good. It meant their enemies had to make use of at least one of their abilities already, which was an advantage to their side. The fewer abilities they had, the better. Even if they could reuse the ability, it still meant that it was one less surprise to be sprung on them. More importantly, it was clear that their enemy was not going to turn around and leave them alone. No big surprise there, but it did mean that they took the withering fire of the firecracker flowers to the face, even as they climbed higher. One after the other, the 𝗂𝒂𝒄 fell. Some never even managed to make it back to the rally point, taken out by ranged units further along the wall. However, as the enemy kept climbing, they encountered these firecracker flowers at new angles and closer distances. "I wonder what the optimal angle is," Matt muttered as he peered out the window. He'd taken to using his eyes rather than the tactical map as it continued to be useless for detailed information. "Looks like this is just about it." He rubbed his chin, trying to mark the location in his mind. It could come in useful in a later battle, knowing how far and what angle his units could concentrate fire. If nothing else, if he could figure out a way to build ways to slow down the opponents more in this location, he should. As he watched, a 𝗂𝒂𝒄 in the lead jerked its head to the side, a spray of blood and viscera erupting from its face. A lucky hit, Matt assumed, to take out the eyeball and plunge deeper, for the creature dropped not too long after, ignoring the rest of the attack that had peppered its body. The carnage was sufficient enough that rivulets of blood were beginning to flow down the hill, in trickles perhaps, but enough. "How many have they lost, boy?" Irvine growled over the open communication line. Matt hesitated, then scurried back to the tactical table. "Well, just wait," Matt said, looking at the information. "One unit, the unupgraded one, I believe, is down to 3 units left. No, 2. And there's, 2, 10 minus 7, 3, and, 2. That makes 9 more on top of that down. 14 total. Nearly a third of the force." Matt blinked, surprised. "That seems high. Does that seem high to you? Because that seems really high to me." "It's unusual, yes," Irvine said, satisfied. "Those traps of yours forced them in close. They may not have done much before, but this time with the ranged units, it's splitting the elements." Then the alchemist sighed. "Too bad the easy boil is over." "What?" "They're at a bad angle now," Irvine replied. Those words had Matt turning back to the window. He realized he could hear the difference even before he could see it, the slowdown and the pop-crackle of the firecracker seeds going off. Those ranged units on the side at the far ends of the wall no longer fired, and the cluster above the gate were firing slower, too, almost leaning over. That was the other thing. He could no longer see their enemy. Too many, too close, the wall in the way, and his own people, which probably meant... He heard it moments later, the hammering noise on the door. Unlike the rhythmic slamming of the militia that had attacked them, the attacks were more sporadic. On the other hand, the noise was significantly louder, such that each thud made Matt wince even from his position in the tower. "What's going on down there?" Matt could not help but ask. "They're throwing themselves at the gates," Irvine said. "The woodlings have begun throwing stones down, but we've got too many here." "We do?" "I'm sending one unit down. They can't all throw the stones or use the oil, so we might as well keep one in the courtyard," Irvine said. "Your call," Matt said. He watched the gate as they talked, waiting for the durability pop-up to appear as he wandered back to the table. Soon enough, it showed up, making him grimace. Good news, their gates had doubled in durability. Bad news, the 𝗂𝒂𝒊 were doing more than double the damage each time they hit. If not for the fact that they were forced to run back and throw themselves at the door, or so he assumed, they'd likely have taken the doors down faster. As it was, he was not certain the additional durability was helping that much, at least in lengthening the battle. "When should we deploy the oil?" Matt asked, curious. He knew that was one of their best methods of taking down their attackers, but it was also better used when there was an actual battering ram in play. In this case, a crowd of 𝗂𝒂𝒊 loping forward and throwing themselves against the doors was not optimal. "Just wait," Irvine muttered. "We want them bunched up. When the doors are close to falling, they'll start to gather to rush us. That's when we'll use it." "Oh, that makes sense," Matt said. A lot of sense. He cursed himself for not thinking of something so simple. So many little things to learn. Another deep thump, the durability shooting down. Without anything better to do and realizing that even if the 𝗂𝒂𝒊 were dying to the stones to the attacks of the firecracker flowers who were leaning almost right over the wall, they weren't dying fast enough. Matt moved over to his weapons. He grabbed the makeshift crossbow he had made and began the long process of cranking it back. Because of that, he managed to miss the real drama at the gates. Chapter 12. 𝗂𝒂𝒊 waved the woodlings forward, holding back as he had promised Matt. He wanted to rush in to join them at the forefront, but the orc managed to keep himself in check. The terror and concern in Matt's voice still rang through the orc's head. Losing now would be a fool's move. While the others might have indicated that what he did was of little consequence, he still had to believe that his attack, his siege, was at least a minor distraction to their enemy. Up the hill the group climbed, following the road that led away from the rest of the village. They had bypassed the village as planned, giving the buildings a quick glance as they went along but not stopping. Though there were no people on the walls surrounding the village, 𝗂𝒂𝒊 still chose to keep a half eye on them. The road upwards was smooth, untouched. Nothing blocking the way, no traps laid out for them. Still, 𝗂𝒂𝒊 was careful to let the woodlings sweep the area first with one of their members, and then the rest of the team, before he and the firecracker flowers made their way up. Still, no new surprises played out, which left 𝗂𝒂𝒊 smiling grimly. It seemed not all lords were the same, willing to throw themselves into random work to improve their chances, an advantage to their side, it seemed. 2/3 done with their ascent, 𝗂𝒂𝒊 ordered the firecracker flowers to the front. A simple barked order had them loose their attacks at the 𝗂𝒂𝒊 who weren't even smart enough to hide, before the rather obvious ranged units attacked. They did flinch and move away when the loud crack of the shattered seeds erupted, but it was too little, too late. Lucky for them, the difference in height and angle meant that the attacks were mostly at the near maximum of the firecracker flowers, such that the seedlings that struck them, while painful, were not immediately fatal. "Damn, closer then," 𝗂𝒂𝒊 complained. A waste of a good surprise attack, especially now that the damn animals were hiding. Still, it was his first time using the flowers, and guesstimating the angle was tricky. It was not as though he had a huge amount of skill with ranged units. His people had used javelins mostly, and those you did not throw at castle walls. Usual orc tactics were to pillage the village, burn the fields, and then make their enemies meet them on the field, or hide till they starved. "Advance and loose!" He would have to stop them at some point, 𝗂𝒂𝒊 judged. Not a good idea to try to fire nearly directly upwards. When, however, was going to be the question. More learning as he went along. Sometimes 𝗂𝒂𝒊 wished that his lord had chosen some good orcs as his race to build from. He knew what to do with a good orc. As the woodlings advanced, shifting around their own people with minimal fuss, he also noted how their hands were changing. growing thicker and wider as they neared the doors. The orc had to grin. It seemed that the ability of the units to change to do damage to siege buildings was not entirely restricted to just militia or raiders. That would help. That would help a lot. "Halt!" 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 roared, and then he proceeded to chivvy the firecracker flowers into a line, not too spread out, but far enough apart that they would unlikely be taken out by some new spell or surprise attack or cause trouble to one another. By the time he was done, the woodlings were at the gate, stones raining down on them. Even as the first blows began to land, he noted how the falling rocks were knocking the woodlings about, though the damage done was not negligible, but certainly not as worrying as if these were orcs. Wood bark and tough trunks cared less about being struck by a falling stone, especially when the titular head of a woodling was more for aesthetics than use. Even now, after so many weeks, 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 wasn't exactly sure how they sensed anything beyond magic. "Try that on for size," 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 said, smirking. It also didn't help that the 𝗂𝒂🗊 were really bad at actually managing the stones that they were attempting to use. Picking them up and dropping them over the edge of the wall seemed more work than they were used to doing, possibly because of their lack of opposable thumbs. Now that they were here, the actual siege was going very well. Each booming strike from the woodlings were dropping the durability of the gates by a significant and visible degree. The firecracker flowers, held further back and angled upwards so that they could not hit their own friends, were injuring and even killing the occasional 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄. The smell of new sap and fresh growth filled the air around 𝗂𝒂💊, causing his nose to itch a little as he waited. The siege was a success, and if they had not been on a deadline, 𝗂𝒂💊 would be grinning. As it was, he found himself shifting from foot to foot, wanting to run forward and contribute to the attack with his axe, but having to force himself to calm. A good thing, too. 𝗂𝒂💊 watched as the 𝗂𝒂💊 switched tactics. Boiling oil above the gate tipped over, splashing down amongst his units. It caught nearly half of the units gathered beneath, splashing the others with the hot liquid. Twisted screams of breaking bark and snapping wooden limbs echoed as the woodlings dealt with the attack. Still, it was less effective on the wood elementals than it would be on a fleshy humanoid. 𝗂𝒂💊 was beginning to grin in relief, forgetting there was one other card to be played. There was no warning, no indication of what might happen. It was, in 𝗂𝒂𝒊's view, very similar to what happened when his lord had cast his own magic healing. 1 second, the woodlings were hammering on the door, shaking the oil off their body with each movement. The next, a spark appeared, which quickly became a rolling fireball that covered the group. A fireball that, once caught on the oil, kept burning. Rather than dying off like any other spell would have, this flame kept burning, caught on hot oil and the wood that lay beneath the liquid. As ready sources of fuel, the woodlings lit up with more shrill and piercing screams as they continued to hammer at the door, creating an unearthly and sickening melody. 𝗂𝒂💊 snarled, eyeing the gate itself that seemed to refuse to catch fire too. Nearly all his woodlings were now on fire. Just as suddenly as it began, the siege that had been going so well was in real danger. After all, there was still another spell the enemy could utilize. Chapter 13. "Shit, I should have known," Matt muttered once 𝗂𝒂💊 finished reporting in. He demanded an answer when he caught sight of the change in units, the suddenly burning figurine right in front of him. Asymmetric spells in units of equivalent strength was a known factor. "I do not believe you should have, my lord, but we will strive on. The gates are nearly down. If I must stride over the bodies of our unit and destroy the gates myself, I shall do so." "Watch yourself, 𝗂𝒂💊. We can't lose you to foolishness, and there's still the 𝗂𝒂💊 inside." "I shall not fall," 𝗂𝒂💊 rumbled. Matt shook his head, not entirely certain he agreed with the orc, but loath to argue with him, especially considering he had his own problems to deal with. Turning away from the hex units much further up, he regarded the gates of his own fight, and winced. 20-something durability left. Not a long time at all. Just as he was about to call out to Irvine, a rending, shattering noise echoed through the surroundings once again. The gate durability disappeared, dropping down to 0 in one moment and leaving Matt with his jaw hanging. He was torn, unsure of which direction he should look before he ran for the window. He was just in time to see the front ranks of the remaining 𝗂𝒊𝒏𝒈 pour around the warlord hero who stood before the shattered doorways, sword smoking, weaving a little from whatever ability or action it had taken to destroy the door. Even as he tried to grasp what happened, the first 𝗂𝒊𝒏𝒈 struck the first ranks of the woodlings standing before the doors, their bodies glowing as they activated the charge ability. "Oh, shit," Matt whispered. At the same time, Irvine was shouting, ordering the firecracker flowers to tip the boiling oil over. To kill the hero or to slow down the attack, he was not certain. He waved his hands, shouting other orders for the rest of the woodlings to join the other unit on the ground, watching as the wood elementals slowly pulled themselves away from the wall. All too slow. Matt could tell it was going to be too slow. The damn woodlings were falling as the 𝗂𝒊𝒏𝒈 hit them in a flurry of fur and claws. Half of them went down, falling to the ground or splintering apart, their wooden arms swinging. Everything was happening so fast, like a movie utilizing jump cuts. He couldn't understand how his people had died so fast, even if they were leaving 𝗂𝒊𝒏𝒈 bodies on the ground as the wood elementals fell back. Big, heavy hands swung down, smaller limbs swung upwards, and metallic tips pierced bodies. They struck again and again as they fell back, leaving corpses even as other 𝗂𝒊s streamed outwards to the staircases, racing to the walls to take woodlings that were on their way down. It was chaos down in the courtyard, the howling and screaming of the 𝗂𝒊𝒏𝒈, the silent battle that the woodlings fought, and the continued crack of firecracker flowers firing down at the few opponents still outside. The oil tipped over at last, and Matt smiled grimly. At least they got the hero. At least... Shit. Where was the hero? Eyes searched the milling bodies, hunting for the armored figure. When had they recovered? When had they moved out of the way? He could not tell, having been too enthralled by the battle and chaos beneath. There. He could see it, could see his enemy. See them striding past the two busy woodlings, see them come for the doors to the keep itself. He watched as they disappeared out of his sight and found himself leaning far out to try to get a glimpse, catching just enough of a sight to see them swing backwards with their sword in preparation to strike the main doors. That was when realization struck. That was when he realized what the hero was doing. He remembered then that burning gaze that they had turned on him, the unspoken promise. And Matt knew, with the certainty of annual reports, what was coming for him. Irvine shook his head, his ears still ringing. The cotton he had stuffed into them when the firecracker flowers had started firing had done little to muffle the explosive attack that hero had used. Irvine was still wondering what that attack had been. How had they managed to miss that on the skills? "Move, move, move! Take the 𝗂𝒊𝒏𝒈 down!" Irvine finished ordering the woodlings, tossing one last packet of dust over the side of the wall. He watched it strike the oil on the other side, the entire mixture suddenly exploding and catching the last of the enemies that were attempting to enter the building, throwing them down and scattering their bodies and limbs around. He could smell the twisted burnt oil and hair odor reaching up to him, the delectable aroma of roasting flesh and the stomach-twisting knowledge that it was somewhat living creatures that he was salivating over. Then he pushed it all aside. "Open fire inside! Inside, you idiots!" Irvine snarled at the firecracker flowers, watching the units slowly turn. Too damn slowly as far as he was concerned. At least the ranged units on the other walls had started firing already, though the wide spray of their pellets was catching their own people as often as it was hitting the 𝗂𝒊𝒏𝒈. Good thing the woodlings didn't seem to mind, and their hardened bark managed to deflect the majority of the metallic seeds. Also a good thing, sort of, was the fact that there weren't just that many of the woodlings to be struck. Of course, the reason for that was because they were a giant mess of splinters and shattered wood all across the courtyard. A sweeping review of the monsters below told Irvine that there were just over a dozen of the 𝗂𝒊𝒏𝒈 there. Maybe a couple more on the way up, but those were struggling to win against the woodlings coming down. One-on-one, without their boost to movement, the 𝗂𝒊𝒏𝒈 were finding that the woodlings were a tougher battle than before. Most died one-on-one, or soon after they took down a woodling. If he had as many woodlings left, that would be a good thing. He didn't, As it stood, once they took out all the woodlings, the 𝗂𝒂𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂💂 were likely going to be overwhelmed, which meant it was time for him to add to the fight. Pulling out a batch of potions, Irvine prepared to cast them into the courtyard and at the monsters, only to hesitate when he realized that he'd forgotten someone. The hammering and splintering noise that interrupted his thoughts drew his gaze to the enemy hero standing before the doors of the keep, wielding their sword as they smashed their way in. For a long moment, Irvine was caught between saving Matt or winning the battle, because he knew, intuitively, he could not do both. Chapter 14. 𝗂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 crumbling under the charging form of the assaulting 𝗂𝒂𝒊. This one, at least, had taken the 𝗂𝒂𝒊 with it, the entire body collapsing on top and trapping the creature beneath it. Unlike the other two woodlings who'd managed to survive long enough to take the door down, that left 7 𝗂𝒂𝒊, some of them injured but mostly not, facing his full rank of uninjured firecracker flowers through the opening of the door, and, of course, himself. "Loose!" Growling the order, 𝗂𝒂𝒊 watched as the regrouped firecracker flowers opened fire at the loping semi-humanoid jackal-like creatures that rushed the entrance. They came, head down, into the withering fire. For once, 𝗂𝒂𝒊 saw the full strength of the ranged units. It was not the ranged fire at an angle that the firecrackers' flowers excelled at, nor sniping off defenders. No, what they were meant for, what they excelled at, was this range. The mid-range, when a unit was in the midst of a charge, seeking to close in on you. And in those few moments, when they were crossing the intervening ground, packed together cheek to jowl, withering fire would erupt. The first rank of 𝗂𝒂𝒊 fell, the glow around them never fully realizing as seedling shards tore into muscles and fur, burst eyes, and entered open, howling mouths. Footsteps staggered, twisted as balance was disrupted and monsters fell, limbs peppered and robbed of strength. The rank behind leapt, jumping over their fallen brethren to make it only another half-dozen steps before the second round of fire arrived, tearing into the group and dropping even more of the monsters. 2 dead in the first rank, the other 2 injured and struggling upwards. 3 more leapt over, only for all 3 to fall. Then the firecracker flowers no longer had any additional arms and had to wait, their seeds reloading. Even the fact that they had all 4 arms was a matter of training, 𝗂𝒂𝒊 having ordered them to gather and stop firing earlier. Now only 2 enemies were left, limping forwards. These, 𝗂𝒂𝒊 chose to fight directly, rushing the pair. Confused and injured, they were not in a line, and it was a simple matter for the orc to step aside when the first monster lunged at him, wielding his axe to tear open its stomach and detach one of its legs with a swing. The second 𝗂𝒂𝒊, its body glowing with power, threw itself forward. It carried the orc backwards, tumbling him over, but the axe haft was in the way of the slathering mouth. The warlord heaved and tossed the monster behind him. The creature landed, crying piteously as it bounced off of its injured torso before the firecracker flowers fell upon it, wielding spindly arms like clubs. 𝗂𝒂𝒊 ignored them, hopping back to his feet and discounting the twinge of pain in his lower back. Instead, he rushed into the keep, ducking through the broken doorway and searching for additional enemies. Seeing nothing, he waved the remainder of his army forward to the central building even as he trotted over to it himself. Without opposition, it was a simple matter to begin pounding on the door with his axe, tearing chunks of wood from the impediment. Each strike saw his axe sink in a good few inches, even the hardwood of the door unable to stop the muscular orc. It was only a matter of time before he'd break through. His lips pulled apart. 𝗂𝒂𝒊 grinned in victory as he swung, putting all of his considerable muscle into the movement. Matt listened to the rhythmic thump of sword on wood. He winced, wondering what it was doing to the hero's weapon. It could not be good. Then again, he had never asked 𝗂𝒂𝒊 if the weapon he used needed maintenance. He'd seen the orc do it, but that could be a matter of routine, of trained instinct rather than actual need. The world they lived in was weird enough that it restocked the training pells and the wooden weapons down in the yard without him seeing anyone do it. Same with their stores of food and clean linen. Thump! Licking his lips, He listened as the cries of the 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒈, the thump and cackle of burning bodies, and the shuffling of creatures reached him from the window. The smell of new sap, spilled blood, and innards mixing together such that he wanted to retch. Thump! Or that could just be the tension in his stomach, the way it knotted tighter with each strike. He took a hand off the crossbow, careful not to jostle the trigger as he wiped sweaty palms on his pants again. His throat was unconscionably dry, and he took a sip of the mug of water he had set out. Only a sip. He didn't want to need to pee when the hero came. Not again. Thump! He'd taken Irvine's advice earlier that day, made sure to eat little, pee a lot, and empty his bowels. No reason to let other nastier things into his body if he got stabbed or shot in the stomach, and that had been quite the conversation. Thump! Or was that conversation the last time they had a fight? He couldn't remember. Time memory was warping, his thoughts scattering with each strike. He glanced at the map again, but there was nothing he could do. No spells to use? At least that was an answer. 1 spell per battle, it seemed, with a cooldown for a period of time after that. Worth knowing, because you'd have to be careful about when you deployed an attack. Gotta remember. Thump. Crack. He jumped. Matt was not too proud to say he was startled when the rhythmic attack changed. He flinched, almost pulling the trigger, but he stopped himself. There was still one more door after all, and a whole lot of stairs and places for their enemy to look. Unless they chose to come up here directly. Matt suddenly wondered why he was here, why he was guarding the map. If he had gone somewhere else, would they have won because he was still alive, hiding somewhere like down in the garderobe, or would they lose, automatically because the enemy hero reached this table and touched it? And then everything would end, and he'd die from another stroke, all the while gripping the sides of a shitter and trying to juggle a weapon he had barely cobbled together in his hands. No more noise. Or, well, a lot of noise, but no more rhythmic noise of a door being assaulted. They were probably fumbling around, trying to get the bar out of the way, pushing the door open to get inside and finish the job. 1 door, a lot of stairs, and then he was going to have to learn if his crossbow, cobbled together or not, was going to punch through actual armor. No surprise his hands were trembling. No surprise at all. Chapter 15. Fool, fool, fool. Irvine cursed himself as he hurried towards the staircase that led off the walls. No jumping down the ladder or attempting to head down that way. For one thing, the nearest ladder had a pair of 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒈 fighting one another, tearing into each other as the hallucinatory potion he tossed took effect. No idea what they were seeing, or how they'd see him if he went down. At the same time, his fingers flew over the 4 potions and the 2 satchels left strapped to him. 2 of the vials were healing potions, 1 a satchel of clotting dust. Not particularly useful for the fight, but necessary. Which left him with 2 remaining potions for offensive use and a single dust satchel. The itching powder was something he would have wielded when they were outside, but inside the courtyard it'd stick around too long. He had no desire to face the consequences of that deployment himself. Potion of giant strength was useful, but better for someone like 𝗂𝒂𝒂𝒂. He was no fighter, so pounding a staff or a spear into an opponent's face was for others. No, the only potion that was at all directly useful was the potion of greater dispersal. In other words, an acid. A very powerful acid. He really wanted to keep that one for the hero. So he ran, keeping his shoulders hunched a little as he watched the woodlings and 𝗂𝒂𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 only one 𝗂𝒂𝒊 ahead of him, fighting the last woodling holding the staircases. They'd met halfway down, the 𝗂𝒂𝒊 tearing into the woodling with abandon, even as a pair of firecracker flowers stood above, trying to pepper the pair. Not a great idea to jump in there, but it was still safer. Booted feet slipping on slick stone walls, he hurried forward and managed a few steps down before the crack and tumble that he'd grown used to hearing appeared. The woodling, standing so tall before, suddenly crumpled, falling downwards. No luck, the damned 𝗂𝒂𝒊 managed to back off and press its body against the wall so that the falling tree managed to miss it. It slid downwards, joining the mess of fallen bodies of its other comrades, all of it intermixed with corpses of the 𝗂𝒂𝒊 themselves. Fool! He clutched the potion by his side, hand held down. He could throw it, catch the monster as it jumped. But if he did that, he'd have nothing to deal with the hero. And deal with him he would need to do, if Matt managed to survive long enough. Hopefully that fool boy had hidden himself. The 𝗁𝒊𝒄 was glowing. Enough time had passed, it seemed, that it had recharged its charge attack. Throwing itself forward, it blurred up the stairs. Rather than face it or waste his potion, Irvine cast himself off the stairs. He had noted the tree trunk corpse of a woodling leaning over precariously, too unstable to slide down against, but if he grabbed it as he fell and hit it right... The crash, the pain of his arm gripping a broken wooden limb, the tree trunk body tumbling down and slamming into the wooden outer walls and the edge of the stairs. It made the old man wince, even as he bounced sideways and came to a sudden stop as he landed on the soft, meaty corpse of a fallen 𝗁𝒊𝒄. The 𝗁𝒊𝒄, having charged right by him, unable to stop, was down the top of the stairs, and the rest of the firecracker flowers on this side of the wall were firing at it, tearing it to shreds. Good. Maybe they'd survive long enough to deal with the rest of the enemy racing along the edge, intent on taking them from behind. For Irvine, that was all academic for now. They could win, he felt. They'd taken enough of the 𝗁𝒊𝒄 down, whittling fire from their ranged units sufficiently to end this battle, especially with the enemy hero not taking part in the fight. If they had been, it might have been a very different proposition. Then again, as he scrambled across the courtyard, slipping and scurrying in the blood, ignoring the torn branches of the woodlings and the choking smell of burnt flesh and cracked wood, the inside of his lip bleeding into his mouth from where he'd hit it, he could not help but think that maybe they'd made the right choice. After all, the front door was open, and he must be upstairs now, tearing at the final door. Boiling potions, he hoped the boy was smart enough to hide. He'd bet everything on it. You know, at times like this, you should be monologuing, telling me if I come out, you'll spare my life, or perhaps that this doesn't have to be this way, Matt said, licking his lips and forcing his voice to be calm. It wasn't doing that well, what with the minor tremble that he could hear, but it was better than he thought. Talking, even if it was just talking, was better than nothing. Rather than answer, the door was struck again. He watched the door planks tremble, wood dust shivering outwards, the metal holding it closed, shivering. Matt really wished he'd taken the time to reinforce this final door, drop a plank or something between it. Right now, only a simple, if thick, metal latch was doing all the work, and it was halfway bent now. Footsteps retreated as they got ready to ram into the door once more. No, we're not doing the evil overlord monologue now. Oh, wait, am I the evil overlord in your scenario? Am I the guy who killed your mother or father or other family and then sent you on a path of vengeance? Matt shook his head. I'm pretty sure I didn't do that. I did kill that healer, though. Maybe that counts? The next thump was even louder, the door latch twisting even harder. He winced, realizing it would only take another hit, maybe two, before it gave way. Shifting his position a little so that he could get a good angle when the door flew open but wouldn't be standing right in front of it, he continued talking. Sorry, I mean for killing her, and for touching a sore subject, but all's fair, right, in love and war? And I'm not saying we're in love, but we're surely at war. You did come here to kill me and my people. Matt hesitated as he listened to the footsteps end, the slight pause as the enemy hero got ready to throw themselves at the door. You want to tell me why? Heavy footsteps moving fast, then a loud thump and shriek, his door bursting open as the latch gave up even the ghost of resistance. The hulking figure on the other side of the door loomed in the shadow, for a moment stunned and recovering their balance. Crossbow up by his lower ribs, Matt pulled the trigger of the weapon. He'd have it on his shoulder, except he was not entirely trusting of the contraption even now. No idea if the cords he'd wrapped around one another, pulled tight, would give way. No idea if the twisted metal and wood arms that provided the tension and energy might snap. No idea if the bolt might shatter when it was thrown forwards because it put too much strain on it. No, better not to risk having the entire thing exploding in his face. Surprisingly, nothing like that happened. The trigger depressed, the portion holding string and bolt in place disappearing into the wood, and the bolt was thrown forwards. Bolt thrower for sure. Blink, and Matt had blinked, and you'd miss the projectile crossing the intervening space, hitting the armored figure almost directly in the center of their chest plate, and then, having imparted a large portion of its energy, deflect off the curve to the side. The bolt flew down the rest of the way, plate armor not pierced. The enemy hero got their feet under them, weapon rising to swing at Matt, and instinct had him throwing the weapon at the face. The crossbow, hours of work in it, was parried with casual contempt, the wooden block flying away and bouncing off the floor. However, unexpectedly, behind the crossbow was a fast-moving Matt. Head down, shoulder leading the way, he hit the enemy hero in a similar manner to how they'd taken down the door, except there was no more door, just a small landing and a lot of steps. They staggered backwards, once, and then a foot reached for balance and found none. Instinct had them grabbing for the wall with one hand and swinging the sword with the other, catching a recovered and surprised Matt across the chest, even as they tumbled down the stairs. "Point to me," Matt breathed, even as he staggered back, clutching the bleeding cut across his chest. Of course, now he had to figure out what to do about his enemy when they climbed all the way back up. Unless they broke their neck on the way down. Nah, he wasn't that lucky. Chapter 16. 𝗂𝒂𝒃 surged through the door, looking up and down the entrance hallway. He waved the firecracker flowers in after himself and took the exit to the right, heading for the tower staircase. The keep looked exactly the same as their own, so he assumed the staircases were the same. He would go for the tactical room, finish this fight before his lord died. The flowers would check out the rest of the keep, just in case the enemy lord was hiding. The orc took the stairs 2 at a time, loping upwards with casual ease. His heart thudded in his rib cage, faster than it should have for the slight degree of danger he had been in. Tension kept his heart beating fast, his breathing a little quicker than it should have. Even so, the extremely fit orc found himself at the top of the tower facing the only door available to him in all too quick a time, just a little out of breath. He pushed against the door with one hand, figuring that he might as well try, only to find himself thrown backwards, his body shocked and rigid as lightning raced through him. He crashed into the wall behind him, glancing off the circular wall and tumbling down the stairs. Finally, 𝗂𝒃𝒃 fetched up against the edge of one landing a floor down, his head ringing, his ribs aching. A pair of fingers that had been caught on the tumble down dislocated backwards. A deep cut over one side of his head pumped blood down his jaw and around his ear, even as he saw stars. Fingers trembled and shook. His body felt as though it was on fire. His heart had stopped, the orc swore, for a second or two before the impact against the wall had restarted it. It had hurt, in a strange, disassociative way, entirely unlike the pain he felt right now as his body throbbed from the numerous bruises and broken bones he felt. Lying on the ground, 𝗂𝒃𝒃 allowed himself a few more seconds before pushing himself to his feet. He tilted his head to the side, one way and then the other, the world spinning a little with each movement. Not too bad, the orc figured. He'd had worse. Next were the fingers that were hurting with each breath. He took hold of them with his other hand and tugged quickly, not giving himself time to brace or think about it. The first would end up damaging his tendons, and fingers worse, the second would make him hesitate. He neither had time nor patience to lie on the ground or bemoan his injuries. As he levered himself upwards, the orc frowned because he realized he was missing his axe. Looking around, he could not see it anywhere near here. Hopefully, it was upstairs. The firecracker flower unit came along even as 𝗂𝒃𝒃 managed to get himself to his feet. Good timing. Up the stairs. Take the door down, 𝗂𝒃𝒃 growled. He watched as the firecracker flowers turned without a word and started ascending. Once the unit had managed a half-dozen stairs, 𝗂𝒃𝒃 gripped the side of the wall and began to limp after it. Each movement was agony, his ribs throbbing against his side with each breath, his left ankle twisted and refusing to bear his weight properly. He was halfway up before the thump of wood against wood echoed above. The orc cocked his head to the side, not hearing the sizzle of lightning. He sniffed, then grimaced, realizing he could barely smell anything right now. Were the nerves in his nostrils completely burnt out, fried by the lightning in one sudden surge? Or was the reek of his own cooked flesh, his barely washed body with sweat and the stink of fear blocking everything else out? Hard to tell. Each step, making his way up. Each step braced against the wall, panting breath. A part of 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 wondered about the magic on the door. What had created it? What had caused it? Why had it only struck him and not the firecracker flowers? He did not know. But certainty ran through him as he finally managed to make his way up, picking his axe that had fallen down a short distance from where he had first impacted the wall. That it would matter. The answer to the question might be the answer to victory or defeat. Irvine slowed his headlong rush, sagging against the nearby wall of the staircase as he tried to control his breathing. Every breath was like sucking through a straw, his heart beating faster than the first time he concocted his first fire breath potion, hands shaking as his master watched over the side, protected, unlike him, by the shielding they'd propped up. Of course, like his wives, by the fourth one he'd done, his hands had stopped shaking, and his fingers were a lot defter. Wiping at his sweaty face, the old man looked up at the staircase once again and winced. It was a long way up, and running was more than he could do, a fact that the alchemist had realized after making it a third of the way there. Ahead, he could hear the crank and thud of metal-shod boots on stone. It moved slowly, with slight hesitations and interruptions between each movement, as though the walker were struggling to ascend. Surprising, since Irvine did not recall there being a woodling unit inside the building at all to have done damage to the enemy hero or delay them. Some internal defenses they did not know about triggering? Perhaps a guard or two that formed to help defend the keep, just like the militia units had been created? If so, that would make 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄's life more difficult too, but that was less of a concern than keeping the boy alive. Precipitating potion, he hoped the boy was hiding downstairs. Drag, thump, pause. Metal clashing and moving, and then another pause. Then another drag and thump. Rhythmic, at least in the way the enemy hero was moving upwards. Irvine pushed himself off the wall, forcing himself to climb now that his breathing had settled a bit. He slowed a little as he tried to move silently. Even slower, he felt his heart still beating all too fast, his breathing a little too loud and harsh. He could hear his blood pounding in his ears, sweat staining the back of his clothing, tension bleeding into every movement, even as he tried to work out what to do. He had his potion still. Acidic, but if they were wearing armor, it might not do much. He'd have to get it into the face or under the armor. Difficult. Thoughts came to a crashing halt when he saw the small pool of blood. Then more splatters going up. Irvine bent low, reaching out to touch the red fluid before stopping himself. Right, don't touch random liquids. You never know what they might be, even if it smelled and looked all too familiar. Irvine straightened, a slight rush of adrenaline in him making him smile grimly. Perhaps this might not be as difficult as he envisaged. If his opponent was injured enough, he could catch the enemy by surprise and finish the battle. Now all he had to do was get up the tower. Problem was, he was exhausted, the adrenaline that had carried him past the 𝗂𝒂𝒊𝒄 and through the initial fight draining out of him, leaving his legs quivering and his breathing coming in heaving gasps. It did not help that he had to take things slowly in fear of alerting his opponent and getting caught out. As he neared the top, Irvine found himself moving faster. No point in surprising the enemy if they were killing the boy. As though the thought had summoned the specter of failure, voices came to him, along with the clash of weapons and wood. Cursing, Irvine started running up the stairs as a fresh surge of adrenaline took a hold of him. Chapter 17. Try to. Let's not fight, right? Matt said, jabbing his spear forwards. His opponent did not even shift, letting the point come to a stop a good 3 inches from their armored body. Instead, they edged a foot forward, and Matt instinctively backed away again. I mean, look at you. You're not in a position to fight. Not at all, right? In fact, Matt was wondering how the enemy hero was managing to stand at all. They were on their feet, moving forward slowly, but one leg was obviously dragging behind, something wrong with the foot or hip itself. There was a significant dent down one side of the armor and along the helmet, skewing it slightly to the right. Even so, they kept advancing, and that sword was still gripped tight and pointed in his general direction. You know, this Terminator thing is... Hiya! Punctuating his last words with a shout, Matt lunged forward and attempted to skewer his opponent in the chest with the spearhead. He'd aimed for the head, but it was actually hard hitting a head, especially at over a 6-foot-plus distance, with a tip that was moving really fast and gripped near the end. He certainly would have better coordination if he actually stepped closer and jabbed while holding on to more of the spear. Doing so would put him all too close to his opponent, a factor that he was really not looking forward to. That sword might have less range, but it could still take off an arm. Instead of backing away or even letting the armor take the attack, the sword swept up from the bottom right to crash against the spear, throwing it off course. It was hit so hard it nearly tore the weapon out of his hands, forcing the point completely out of line and leaving Matt vulnerable. Knowing that, his enemy pushed closer. They managed one full step, landing on their good leg and yanking their injured leg forward before they faltered, unable to cross the remaining distance properly as they tried to propel themselves onward with the injured leg and, instead, crumpled. It would have been a great time for Matt to attack. Even the inexperienced fighter knew that much. Unfortunately, by the time he managed to get his own spear under control, pulled back to his arm and pointed in the right direction, with just a slight amount of fumbling as his hands refused to move properly, the opponent was back on their feet, sword pointed at him. Come on, I can see it hurts. That sucks. But why do you keep pushing yourself? Just stop, Matt said. You can't want to kill me that bad. I really do. Matt froze, surprise widening his eyes. He nearly missed the hand that moved, that grabbed at the spear just behind the tip and yanked the weapon forward. He moved a couple of steps closer, then his feet started pushing backwards, only releasing the weapon at the last moment as the sword came swinging towards his hands. A touch too slow, the weapon slicing through the edge of his arm with just a slight tug as he fell back. No pain, not just yet, though he knew it would come. The cut on his chest had pulsed as he'd pushed back, body hurting. The hasty bandages he'd pushed into the wound and then wrapped with bandages he wound all around him had been the same. More importantly, "You're a girl!" "Woman!" the enemy hero snarled, taking another dragging step forwards. She was not moving carefully now that he was missing his spear. Instead, she attempted to cross the distance as quickly as possible, even as Matt backed off to the table finally. He grabbed at the crossbow he'd reloaded while his opponent had made their slow way back up, raising it toward her once more. "Shit. Did I kill your lover? I'm sorry if I did. I really didn't mean to do that," Matt said. "You didn't mean?" She pushed forwards, tossing the spear behind her and raising her sword to her shoulder, growling. "You called lightning on her." "Yeah, but you guys are trying to kill me." Weapon near his chest again, braced. He really did not want to use it. He'd seen the crossbow fail once before, and now he was trusting that he would manage to put the bolt somewhere where her armor wasn't. Even with something that wasn't entirely makeshift, he wouldn't have trusted that of himself. "Trying. I'm going to succeed. Then I'm going to kill all your heroes and your lords, and when we're done, your Earth will be ours." "My Earth?" Matt hesitated again, his brain spitting out as he realized what she was saying, or guessed from what she had said. Shit, back off!" He tried to move away, but could not do so, the edge of the table butting up against his butt. Instead, he pulled the trigger on the weapon, watching the bolt loose, even as the string finally snapped. The bolt spun through the air, smashed into her chest, and deflected off the plate, heading up her chest and glancing off her full-face helm. She staggered back, head twisted to the side. Even as she flinched, Matt rushed. Ignoring the burning pain where the whiplash of the broken string hurt his hands, the crossbow body still held tightly. He swung the crossbow downwards, catching her sword by the edge. He pushed against it and felt the blade tear into his forearm as she twisted, but he had the body of the crossbow against her sword and he slammed it into the guard. moments before his shoulder took her. Together, the pair tipped backwards even as the sword crashed to the ground. He bounced off the hard body, wincing as unforgiving metal bruised his shoulder further. He rolled sideways a little, reaching upwards and smashing the hand gripping the sword with the crossbow body as his opponent tried to bring the weapon to bear. Once, twice, gauntleted fingers twisting and locking in place under the repeated attacks. Then, he did it. Her sword released, fingers too pulped to hold on. He grinned triumphantly. Moments before, she thrust her hips and tossed him off her, moving as she rocked upwards to follow him. In moments, she had straddled him, one big, meaty, and metallic hand resting on his body, the other gauntleted arm rising in the air. Chapter 18. 𝗂𝒂𝒂 stepped inside the cracked and broken doorway, cocking his head as he regarded the place. He watched as the firecracker flower unit was bathed in white fire, flames rolling over their body. Now he saw a problem. For while the unit tried to fire, the flames dried out the seeds, and those seeds needed to be wet, needed the liquid to work. Without that reaction, even though the unit attempted to, it could do nothing but stand there. As for the creator of the flames, it was a man with a stick pointed at the firecracker flower. Even as the wood elemental attempted to close the distance, he backed off, grinning wide. A goatee, dark eyes, a flash of gold on his tunic, smirking. Until he saw 𝗂𝒂𝒂. The orc did not waste time. He could not run or tackle his opponent, but he did have his rage ability and an axe. He threw it, sideways this time, one-handed, watching it arc through the air to strike his opponent in the center of the body, just above where the staff was held. Flames sputtered for a moment, fingers slipping off of the grip. The lord staggered back a little, stared at the axe head that was buried most of the way into his body, and blinked. Then he slumped to the ground, staff clattering to the floor. Through the smoke and choking smell of burning wood and cracking sap, 𝗂𝒂𝒂 stumbled the rest of the way in. He stared down at the body, yanked his axe out of the corpse, and it was definitely a corpse now, and grinned. Then he spoke, directing his thoughts to his lord. "My lord?" 𝗂𝒂𝒂's words, echoing from all around the room, distracted the swinging enemy hero for a fraction of a second as she swung her fist down, enough that she did not correct in time when Matt pulled his head out of the way. Mostly. Even so, metal gauntlets tore at the skin of his head, opened a deep cut in his cheek, and sent stars spinning. The loud impact of metal on stone rang through the room, even as Matt tried to push his opponent off, only to fail, pain coursing through him as the wound on his chest flared and robbed him of strength. The gauntleted hand retracted, and Matt realized he could have grabbed it, maybe pulled her close so she couldn't strike him. That would have worked, right? Hard to say when you had a heavy body sitting on your lower body, putting over 200+ pounds of weight onto you and intending to punch you, repeatedly. Instead, he'd missed his chance. And now that she'd reared back again, hand coming up to punch him, he wasn't sure he'd had another opportunity to head her off. One hand rose and pushed against her, trying to tip her backwards and away from him, only for his sweaty palms to slip against slick metal. Rather than let him continue to annoy her, the enemy hero grabbed hold of his arm with the one she'd used to pin him down, shifting it over. He squirmed, and for a few moments the pair struggled. It was made harder for her with the damage to her gauntlet and fingers, such that she let out pained grunts, at which point she just dropped her weight forward and slammed her other forearm onto his chest. Breath driven out, ribs creaking and definitely bruised, Matt stopped struggling for a precious few seconds, long enough for her to get a good grip and placed her weight down on his arm to rear back so that he had nowhere to go, and then swing. Once again, Matt stared at the huge, gauntleted hand coming for his face, intent on pulverizing him. "Not so fast!" Irvine snarled, tackling the enemy hero off Matt and disrupting their swing. The pair tumbled off Matt, just over his shoulder as the fist came slamming down next to the poor man, though the alchemist was a touch too busy to pay attention to that. So long as the boy lived, that was all that mattered. The pair hit the ground with him nearly on her back, both of them sideways. One arm was wrapped around her shoulders, the other holding the vial of acid. He gripped it tight, trying to yank her helmet off or shift the gorget such that he could get to her face or throat. Either would work. In the meantime, she'd started bucking, trying to throw him. Kicking legs caught Matt in the side and stomach, the boy having been turned as the pair tumbled. Now he was curling up on his side, clutching his chest from pain. A little breathless cry was all that he had managed. At the same time, she was grabbing at his other hand with her own damaged one, trying to stop him from holding onto her entirely. This, wrestling on the ground with an armed and armored warrior, was not something Irvine was particularly good at. On the other hand, it was not as though he had much of a choice. He either managed to finish this, or she was going to kill them both. Which was why, concentrated as he was on trying to get her helmet off to get the vial aimed in the right direction, or at least down a gap where it could spill in, he never saw her shift enough to put the back of her helmeted head before his, before slamming it into his face. Irvine felt his nose break. He pulled away, or tried to, but there wasn't much space to move. Not with both of his own hands around her still, even as he automatically relaxed a little. Not far enough for a second jerk to not catch him on the lips, tearing up the inside of his mouth as his teeth cut his own flesh. Then, she was free. One hand, the one attempting to grab him, latched on as she scrambled to her knees, keeping him close. It twisted him around, pulling the vial away from her to the opposite side of his body, giving her control, removing his only weapon. Enough that she could bring up her other hand and swing, striking his torso. Irvine let out a cry of pain, bending over as the enemy took control of the fight again. And all the while, a voice called out, never getting an answer. "Thrice more," 𝗂𝒂𝒂 called out. He received no answer each time. A shiver ran through his soul at what that meant, at the possibility. Rather than wait around, he chose to act. If the enemy was not stopped by the death of the Lord, then it was the tactical map. He strode over to the table, frowning. There was nothing to indicate how he was meant to take control of the table, of the kingdom. Should he destroy it? He stared at the axe he had retrieved, then decided to use that as the final option. Instead, he did what he had seen Matt do before so often. He poked the table. Surprise of surprises, information flowed upwards from the table, replacing the tactical map that had been displayed. Battle report. 𝗂𝒂𝒃 vs. enemy units. Result: defeat. 1 𝗂𝒂𝒃 unit lost, 1 lord lost. Penalties: -5 gold, -4 reputation. Opposition unit detected. Would you like to claim Stone Keep? Y. N. Yes, 𝗂𝒂𝒃 snapped out. Nothing happened, so he did the next option, poking at the letter Y. It flickered and flowed, the text disappearing and new notifications appearing in its place. It hurt 𝗂𝒂𝒃's head to deal with so much text. He had defeated the enemy. Why did it not just acknowledge his victory? Stone Keep claimed. To claim complete ownership, keep in contact of control table for a period of 30 seconds. 𝗂𝒂𝒃 frowned, but placed his hand back on the table. New numbers appeared, counting down the time. As he stood there, he realized there was something he could offer. My lord, just stay alive. I am claiming the keep right now. All three opponents scrambling on the ground, a bloody and tired alchemist whose hand had dropped his offensive potion, the enemy hero warlord, and the ruler of the keep, all startled at the voice's words. They froze, before they reacted in different ways. Irvine tried, again, to wrench his hand free. Blood and sweat and mangled fingers managed to provide sufficient leverage that he was able to throw himself away from the incoming strike, even as he felt something in his wrist twist and tear. The enemy hero swung, and though they missed the alchemist, ignored their own injuries, and struggled to stand as they searched for the enemy lord, whether they had lost or not, she intended to finish off Matt before she ran out of time. As for Matt, he'd recovered enough, and lucked out enough, to be near the spear which had been tossed aside. Grabbing hold of it to help himself stand, he had been in the midst of trying to find a location to stab the armored hero when 𝗏𝒃𝒃 had spoken. Now, with the enemy on their feet, he charged. Time seemed to slow down for him. Her body twisted to the side, offering him a glimpse of what he needed. A gap right in the armpit beneath the arm that she had used to swing at Irvine. A space cut out in her breastplate so that she could move easily and not chafe. An opening that he shifted the spearhead to point towards. He ran into her, not trusting in his ability to target it properly, felt as the spear sank into her side after deflecting off the metal a little. It surprised Matt how little effort it took to push the spear into her, barely an impediment, until he hit the other side, skewering her all the way through and butting up against the metal of her breastplate on the other end. Because of that, because of how much energy he'd put into rushing her, he bowled the two over into the side of the table, her body pushed up against and bending over the edge. He held her close, stared into her eyes as she struggled weakly, striking him in the sides and chest as she choked on her blood. Saw the last glimmer of hope and life disappear. And then, because he was at the table, saw the notice as it appeared above it. Chapter 19. Battle Report. 𝗠𝗴𝗶𝗁 vs. enemy units. Result: victory. 1 woodling unit lost, 0 units escaped. Rewards: plus 14 gold, plus 3 reputation. Just as quickly as that appeared, more information appeared. Battle Report. 𝗂𝒂𝒂𝒊𝒄 vs. enemy units. Result: victory. 1 units lost, 0 units escaped. Rewards: plus 4 gold, plus 1 reputation. One notification after the other. Territory occupation granted. 𝗂𝒂𝒂𝒊𝒄 has acquired enemy territory of Baron Mexaon for Baron Feng. Acquired 1 𝗠𝗴𝒶𝒃. Rewards: plus 99 gold, plus 5 reputation. My lord? Hesitantly, 𝗏𝒃𝒃 spoke up. Do you live? I do, Matt said softly. Thank you, and good job. You're welcome, my lord. What am I, a chemical hazard? Irvine groused from his position slumped against a nearby wall. When he noticed Matt looking at him, he waved languidly at the last potion on the ground. Don't touch that. It'll burn your face off, like it should have hers if I had ever gotten it on her. You have done well, alchemist, 𝗏𝒃𝒃 rumbled. Our lord still lives, and we have true victory. Yeah, it sure looks like that, doesn't it? Matt said softly. Then he backed off the body that he was still holding aloft, watching it slump down the table before falling to the ground, blood leaking out of the wound onto the ground. He looked down at his chest, at the blood that stained it, the smell of iron and vomit and something worse coming from the body next to him, and suddenly he turned as the contents of his stomach rose up. It took him a while to recover, to get a hold of his mind and control his reaction, for him to stop dry heaving and for the shakes that had come right after that to end. Neither hero chose to interrupt that process, Irvine dealing with his own issues, and the orc knowing better. After-battle shakes were all too common. So was crying, sobbing, lamenting their fates. All common, all normal. As were the nightmares. Eventually, Matt managed to recover sufficiently to push himself upwards. It took a little longer to fix up the bandages around himself, and then do the same to Irvine, to check what was happening outside, and to watch, rather bemused, as the keep started to repair itself. Among other things, the bodies of the fallen were disappearing, the door to the tower room began to rebuild itself, and splotches of blood and wounds disappeared. Finally, Matt made his way over to the tactical map once more. He leaned over, staring at the new map that had formed, showcasing the land between the 2 villages, the 2 keeps, and the land that they had sight of from their new settlements. He stared at the unit marker for 𝗏𝒃𝒃, and then the one near him, and he found, through the roiling stomach, the pain in his chest that still throbbed, and the incipient headache, A new feeling. Relief, of course, but more importantly, joy. He'd won. It was only one battle, and the fact that no further notifications or his sudden disappearance told him that this war was not over. But now, he knew. There was a world to explore, more enemies to battle, and more victories to be won. A long road to travel. Yet here, now, he had won. And Matt grinned, knowing that he really could do this. He had won, and he would continue winning, beat his opponents, figure out why this was happening, and, most importantly, save Earth. End of Book 3 Status Report. Town 1 only. Day 52. Gold 203.75, plus 22.25 gold per day. Units 2 woodlings, 2 firecracker flour. In production, firecracker flour 4 of 5, woodling 3 of 4. Structures completed. Grove, Road, Stall 2, Ranged Copse, Harbor, Village Number 2 Watchtower, Blacksmith. Structures available. Grove 2, Basic Greenhouse, Watchtower, Tavern, Marketplace, Ranged Copse 2, Stone Harbor, Fishing Dock, Shipyard, Trading Outpost, Temple, Blacksmith Upgrade. Cooldown. 10 days to burst production, 5 days to spellcasting. You've been listening to Magic Kingdom at War, Volume 3, written by Tao Wong, read by Neil Helligers, a member of SAG-AFTRA. Copyright 2024 by Tao Wong. Production copyright 2024 by Starlit Publishing.